All right. Please find a seat, and we will get underway. All right. We got lots of seats up front. Well, I love to hear the energy, and it was wonderful to see everybody meeting each other and catching up outside. So welcome to our California Natural Resources Agency headquarters. My name is Wade Crowfoot, and I get to lead this incredible agency. On behalf of our fellow hosts, the California Air Resources Board and the California Department of Food and Agriculture, I want to welcome you to the first ever Nature-Based Solutions Summit in California. Let's give it a hand. Yeah. All right, we're gonna do a quick snap poll to understand where people are coming from. Raise your hand if you're coming from Southern California. Thank you. We apologize about the cold, foggy weather. If you're coming from somewhere else in the Central Valley, woo-woo! All right, good representation. If you're coming from the Central Coast, all right, handful. Sierra Nevada, all right. North Coast, all right. Northern California beyond Sacramento. All right, and then Sacramentans. All right, good number. Raise your hand if you come from a community-based organization. All right, how about a tribal government or community? All right, local government, local or county government. All right, an academic or scientific institution. All right, if you're a practitioner out there working the land. Agriculture, that's probably raising your hand there. Yeah. If you're in state government, woo! All right, a lot of us. Awesome. Who'd I miss? What categories? Anybody? NGOs? Yeah, NGOs, conservation organizations. Incredible. Well, we are, what's that? Federal. Oh my God, let's see a few hands. Yeah. Thank you, federal employees for staying steadfast. Look, there's a lot of craziness in the world right now and in our country, and it means a lot for you all to take time and to be here. And you know, amidst these challenging times, we talk a lot about. I follow a scientist, Catherine Hayhoe, and she talks about maintaining hope through taking action. And so today is all about taking action. And I just want to frame up our discussion here today. We boil down a lot of our work in the Natural Resources Agency as helping all Californians and nature thrive together. So obviously, nature-based solutions are central to this. Nature needs us, and we need nature. And if you're in the room, you know that. But a lot of us, and a lot of Californians and Americans might not understand that. Now, the nature needs us part is pretty apparent, and it's been kind of a foundation of the environmental movement. We need to protect natural beauty, places like Yosemite or Big Sur or Joshua Tree. We need to protect natural areas. We need to protect fish and wildlife, particularly in California. We have this amazing biodiversity here. But the we need nature is a little less apparent. For so long in our development, as a country and as a state, for a lot of people, nature is a place to go visit on the weekends. We have a quote from the poet Gary Snyder in our lobby that says, "Nature is not a place that you visit, nature is home." And there's this growing recognition that our natural systems, whether it's our water systems, our air, et cetera, are critical to our lives. So yes, nature needs us, and we're doing a lot to protect and restore nature, but we need nature. And that's really where nature-based solutions come in. I think in California, we can be really proud of our climate leadership over the last 20 plus years. California, one of the first places in the world to set a legal target, or make it law actually, to reduce pollution. That was AB 32, that required pollution reduction by 2020, and we met that. And we set a pathway to expand renewable energy. Now we're running the fourth largest economy in the world off 2/3 clean energy, to reduce emissions or pollution from cars, from stationary sources like factories, reduce the footprint of our buildings, expand and introduce new technologies. But there was a blind spot for a while, and it was nature. It was our natural systems. A recognition that When our natural systems work and our lands are healthy, they're a sink on carbon emissions, and when they're unhealthy, they're a source of emissions. And over the last 5 and 10 years, we all have made major progress centralizing nature in the fight against climate change. What does that look like? We now have a scoping plan or a pathway to carbon neutrality that has a specific target to reduce the emissions from our lands. As we'll talk about today, unfortunately, our lands in California are a source of emissions and not a sink of emissions. But now we have a target to reduce those emissions. And thanks to the legislature and the governor requiring us to, we now have a set of very specific land-based targets for practices to expand, to improve the health of our landscapes. Yes, to create more sequestration or removal and storage of carbon, and also to buffer us from these climate-driven extreme events, and also to derive the multiple benefits of healthy lands. So today is all about how do we move further and faster to restore the health of our lands so we can achieve carbon neutrality, so we can protect our people and landscapes from the impacts of climate change, and so we can continue to build our economies in a sustainable way, and so we can continue to protect the health and safety of Californians. So this is the first time that you all and we all have come together, and we come from very different places and all sorts of different sectors. The goal of today is to build connection and to connect the dots, to understand more about the science that's driving this work, what's happening across California, how you can plug into resources, funding, programs, incentives to actually advance your work, your multi-benefit projects, and ultimately the path we want to move forward together on. I'm really excited that this summit is the beginning of a really active 2026. And at the end of the day, we'll talk more about convenings like this that are going to take place landscape type by landscape type across the state over the next 12 months. So in different parts of the state on different landscapes, whether it's urban areas or inland wetlands or forests or ranch lands or grasslands, you all and we all can go deeper on the work that we do together. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Amanda Hansen. And Amanda is our Deputy Secretary for Climate Change at the Natural Resources Agency. And she has been not only the driving force of this summit, but she has been that dot connector to ensure that as we drive forward California's climate action, we bring along nature-based solutions. So over to you, Amanda.
Thanks, Wade. Thank you all so much for being here. And before I jump in, I'm going to be speaking. I'm going to be sharing some background so that all of us are sort of on the same page of what's the state of play for nature-based solutions in California as it relates to the policy and the budget. And we'll turn to experts on science after me. But before I jump in, I want to thank you guys so much for being here. I want to tell people in the back, if you want to sit down, there are seats, and to feel free to ask people to let you in. And I want to say a big thank you to Trust for Public Land because they supported our lunch and our beautiful signage today. So thank you very much. Okay, James, would you bring up my slides? So California has been a leader in protecting and restoring the health of our lands for a lot of different and important reasons for a long time. I'm going to tick through 10 of them. But there are more. Next slide. To protect our water supply. Next. To support biodiversity. Next. To protect public health through filtering air and water pollution. Next. To restore the deep relationship between California Native American tribes, their ancestral lands, and culturally significant species. Next. To expand outdoor recreation. Next. To secure our food supply. Next. To reduce energy costs. Finally, oh no, I'm not done. Next, to improve public spaces and boost community pride. Next, to inspire and rejuvenate. Next, to sustain our economy, and so much more. So, next slide. What's the climate connection? In 2019, the world's top climate scientists released a special report on land, underscoring the critical role that nature plays in stabilizing the global climate. And California policy increasingly recognized the potential for nature to buffer climate impacts, build resilience to future climate-driven extremes, and remove and store carbon pollution. What does that mean? Next slide. So, as Wade mentioned, we know that healthy and resilient lands can reduce near-term climate risks. So, for example, greening communities to protect people from extreme heat. Next, restoring wetlands to buffer communities and businesses from flooding. And next, reducing invasive grasses through ecological grazing. These are just some examples. Next slide. Healthy lands also have a better chance of withstanding future climate impacts like drought, fire, and heat. Next slide. And finally, when lands are healthy and resilient, they can serve as durable carbon sinks, removing more carbon pollution than they release. Next slide. Unfortunately, the opposite is also true. We know that when lands are unhealthy, they increase climate risks to people and nature, they are less resilient to future impacts of climate change, and they release more greenhouse gas emissions. Next. Okay, so now we know that addressing climate change is yet another reason to protect and restore nature. How did California integrate nature into our climate change work? Next. In 2020, the governor issued an executive order to urgently expand nature-based solutions across California to address the climate crisis. Next. In 2021, we updated the state's climate adaptation strategy and included building healthy and resilient lands as one of the 6 North Stars guiding all of our efforts to adapt to climate change. Next. In 2022, we released the state's first climate strategy for nature, designed to help people understand the ways land management can deliver climate benefits. And I want to just take a minute to be clear. The way that California defines nature-based solutions is land management practices that increase the health and resilience of California's lands and unlock their ability to durably store carbon. Next. That strategy informed California's most recent roadmap to carbon neutrality, our scoping plan. And for the first time, we analyzed the amount of greenhouse gas emissions produced and absorbed by California's lands. And while our lands have been a carbon sink in the past, removing more carbon pollution than they release, we found that our lands are currently a carbon source. They emit more carbon pollution than they absorb. Next slide. So to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045, the scoping plan set a target of no more than 4% carbon loss from lands in California by 2045. What does that mean? Next slide. I'll get to that in a second. Also in 2022, it was a big year for nature-based solutions. California codified this sector as a key pillar of California's climate action through AB 1757, which included it called for establishing nature-based solution climate targets, among other things. And we utilized these targets, next slide, to work backward from that no more than 4% on the land. In other words, if we're going to achieve that carbon stock goal, what is the level of climate-smart land management practices that are needed on our landscapes? What is needed in order to achieve that stock target in 2045? These targets are based on best available science, and they call for more than half of California's lands to be managed with nature-based solutions by 2045. Next slide. So what exactly are the nature-based solutions that we're talking about in these targets? There are a lot of them. I'm going to give a few examples. Next slide. Beneficial fire, including prescribed and cultural burns. Next. Riparian and wetland conservation and restoration. Next. Healthy soils and organic ag practices like compost application. Mountain meadow next slide. Oh, you beat me. Mountain meadow restoration. Next slide. Post-wildfire restoration. Next. Desert shrubland restoration. Next. And grazing for wildfire risk reduction. Next slide. So cumulative totals by 2045, these are what the acreage-based targets will deliver. Next slide. Next slide. And I'm really excited to let you all know that we're required to report on our progress toward achieving these targets every 2 years. And the first report was released today. And we are on track to meet, I really wish it was 60%. I don't like the number 59, but it's not. It's 59% of our 2030 targets. We're not quite on track to meet 30% of the targets, and for 11%, we're just not quite there in figuring out whether we're going to, where exactly we are. And that's because it's really hard to know where all of the nature-based solutions are happening in California and how to count them toward these targets. We just don't have precise information. Next slide. Finally, just to wrap up, I'll say we're putting our money where our mouth is. Next slide. We've invested approximately $9.8 billion since 2020 to supercharge nature-based solution action in California. And as many of you know, the climate bond that was passed in 2024, up to $8 billion of the $10 billion can deliver on implementing our nature-based solution targets. So we've done a lot of work to make what we are calling for in these strategies and plans actually happen on the ground. So with that, I'm going to ask my esteemed colleagues, Asmaret and Tashanda, to please come up and give us an overview of the science. Thank you.
All right. Hello, good morning, everyone. I am honored to be here with you all today. Thank you to Secretary Crawford and to Deputy Secretary Amanda Hansen for having me. This conversation is called the Science State of Play. We are going to be talking about the science of nature-based climate solutions and how climate change is affecting California's landscapes and what we as stewards can do to both help nature be more resilient to climate change and be part of the solution to it. My name is Tashanda Giles-Jones, and I am an environmental education and program specialist with environmental charter schools in South LA. I work with 6th through 12th grade students and teachers, educators, and administrators in implementing environmental literacy and nature-based solutions in frontline communities. I also sit on the board of the California Alliance for Community Composting and the Friends of the Los Angeles River. It's my pleasure to be joined today by the Honorable Dr. Asmaret Ashfar Burhay. Dr. Burhay is a professor of soil biogeochemistry, professor of civil and environmental engineering, and Velasco Chair in Earth Sciences and Geology at the Department of Life and Environmental Sciences at the University of California, Merced. She is also the director of Sierra Nevada Research Institute and Climate Institute, and previously served as the director of the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Science. Her past appointments, awards, and recognitions are numerous, and you can find them in her bio. Suffice it to say, she is a science superhero, definitely in my world. So much so that a few years ago, when I was still in the classroom teaching, during March, Women's History Month, while she was working as under the Biden administration, I created a trading card with her face on it. And my students found her card to be one of the most popular to trade. So this is truly an honor for me, and we are fortunate to have her here in California. Dr. Burhay's research focuses on the biogeochemical cycling of essential elements in the soil system, global change science, nanogeochemistry, the political ecology of land degradation and ownership. Her lab's research focuses on carbon sequestration and soil organic matter stabilization mechanisms. Whew. She is passionate about all things soil and is driven to ensure that scientific education and careers are equally accessible to people from all walks of life, and that academic workplaces are free from bias and harassment. Please help me welcome Dr. Brehe. Oh, I gotta push it. Okay, got it. So we have a short amount of time and about 12 hours worth of things to talk about. Okay, so our first question. Dr. Rick, would you be so kind to please give us a brief overview of the role? Okay, better. Okay. Please be so kind to give us a brief overview of the role that natural systems, nature in particular, can play when it comes to solving climate change.
First of all, thank you for that extremely generous introduction. And I'm really delighted to be here with everybody. Thank you, Amanda, for the invitation. And I think the short answer to your question is that nature is integral to our ability to address climate change, right? And nature and the land ecosystem in particular that I study can either be part of the problem or the solution for climate change. It all depends on how we choose to treat the ecosystem, right? Because the reality is that natural ecosystems are important sinks in the carbon cycle. If you think about the amount of fossil fuel derived CO2 that we regularly release to the atmosphere, about half of the excess CO2 we keep releasing is still being taken up by natural ecosystems, including land and the ocean. But the critical thing here is, we know nature can play very important roles in carbon sequestration, but the way we treat land also still releases significant amount of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So it's extremely important to think about how we recognize the ability of the nature, both land and ocean, to sequester atmospheric CO2, to help address the many, many different challenges that we face with climate change. I'm a soil scientist, so to just take it home to bring it home a little bit, there's about 120 billion metric tons of carbon that used to be in the top 2 meters of soil that was released into the atmosphere and is now part of the challenge with increasing concentration of CO2 that we keep trying to address, right? So that's a lot of carbon, 120 billion metric tons of carbon. And so in many ways, you can think about that as obviously a very significant and alarming number, but it is also can give us a guide of how much potential there is to take out CO2, as much of it as possible that we can from the atmosphere through a variety of nature-based solutions to at least bring some of that lost carbon back into the soil. And we have many different strategies available to do that, right? Many strategies that are appropriate for different type of ecosystems. For example, wetlands are unmatched in terms of their ability to take up CO2 from the atmosphere. Obviously, though, the extent of wetlands and the land surface is limited. So the geographic and climate envelope where wetlands can exist limits how much carbon sequestration can happen overall in wetlands, even though they are the fastest in terms of how fast carbon can be sequestered. But the other side of the equation is there's a whole lot of land, including working lands, where we can actually implement nature-based solutions, strategies to increase carbon sequestration through a variety of interventions that include reduced disturbance and maybe even bringing back some of the carbon that's in waste streams, such as animal waste, compost, municipal waste, and things. All of that can also contribute roughly equal to the total amount of carbon sequestration that can happen in wetlands. So the options are many. They exist We know what they are. A big part of this is our willingness and to invest and direct policy to actually allow us to do it. So I like to think about nature-based solutions as a win-win strategy, right? It's a win for nature, it improves soil health, ecosystem health, broadly speaking, but it also has incredible benefits for helping us address climate change with carbon dioxide removal. We're restoring ecosystems such as wetlands, for example, or coastal marshes and others can help address challenges from storm surges, sea level rise, and many, many other challenges. Or even if you think about urban forests and urban environments and greening in general as being incredibly important. It could contribute to a carbon sequestration, but it also helps address the extreme heat, urban heat island impacts that urban communities suffer from. So the many nature-based solutions address a number of interconnected challenges that go well beyond even climate change in terms of what we can accomplish.
Perfect. I could sit here. I forgot I have to ask questions. I'm like, yes, keep going. A couple of years ago, I got to present at the first Nature-Based Education Summit down in Los Angeles at the UCLA Lab School. And one thing we talked about a lot is education in this space for TK through 12. I focus on 6th through 12th grade, but being able to teach in urban settings in frontline communities has shown me that there is such an intersection of the way that you can teach this work and how vital it can be. At our charter school, we take kids out for overnight trips, 6th through 12th grade every year. I build those trips. They go on all different places in California, and it is to connect them to nature that helps build the knowledge that they're getting in the classroom. And one of the ways that we do some of that knowledge building on campus, particularly around soil health, is to teach composting. But not just the act of composting. It starts with teaching kids about earth systems and their structure and the function and how resources cycle through there. And then they get the skill building on their campuses to take organic waste and divert it. And so those are different ways that we connect students, but I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little more about the importance of healthy soil and teaching about healthy soil.
Yeah. I'm very passionate about soil. If you didn't know that about me, if you Google me after this, that will become apparently very, very clear. But part of this is because I think soil is fascinating. Nature is incredibly amazing. And unfortunately, so many kids in our educational systems miss out. Many of them don't know anything about, for example, take soil, or why composting is important for building soil health. Those connections cannot easily be made by people who we did not really introduce this to, right? So that, to me, is a big driver for why I do a lot of science communication, public outreach, and education around soil. And I have to be honest here. I think this is safe space. Soil is not the most glamorous topic you could be talking about, right? Even though I think it's fascinating, but so you kind of have to get over a little bit of a hurdle in getting people to be interested in this medium that they took for granted forever, right? Something they didn't even think about. Most of us have heard, if not maybe even potentially used at some point or another, a word that soil scientists take quite offense, with to call soil dirt, right? And I start a lot of times in my education by telling, especially kids, about going over the dictionary definition of the word dirt, and then asking them whether that matches, that's something that's appropriate to use in reference to the life-giving soil that literally stands between life and lifelessness on this planet, right? Is the reason why there is life in our planet, and the reason why 2/3 of living things on this planet actually are able to live and thrive in this medium that we took for granted. But there's different strategies. One of the things that I find, kind of useful ways to engage people from different backgrounds with soil is, one is this the fact that soil actually hosts the most amount of life and anywhere in the earth system. 2/3 of all life on this planet exists in soil. So it's not just a lot of life, but also a lot of diversity of life that exists in soil. And that's part of the reason why soil is a very effective medium for recycling our waste. And it's also partly why it controls our climate system quite strongly, right? By controlling the fluxes of greenhouse gases in and out of the terrestrial ecosystem. The other point that I use a lot is about antibiotics. Most kids, especially those who are good at school, are told to be doctors, but many of them have never thought about why we have antibiotics, why antibiotics actually work the way they do. And so connecting that to soil microbial ecology and the community dynamics and the reason why we actually even figured out antibiotics work is because soil microbiologist was learning about community dynamics, figured out a way that soil microbial communities can actually kill the TB pathogens that were causing TB. And so just kind of whatever way we can help people connect with nature, I think is amazingly important in my opinion. It becomes even more important with every passing day, where when we take nature for granted, we have to then go back and address so much of the anthropogenically caused, kind of degradation of the environment that are incredibly hard and costly for all of us to deal with in many, many different ways. So that's that.
That made me think about, I was at a conference recently and learning about, I believe it's yellow fever down in San Bernardino County because of the lack of healthy soil and the dirt and climate change and all the things. But yes, the valley fever. That's it, not yellow, valley fever. But I want to going to start a whole rumor. Okay, so talking soil, but I do want to bring in like the wildfires and the heavy storms we've been experiencing. I mean, we know that climate change is here, right? But can you talk to us a little bit more about how climate change is challenging our natural systems here in California particularly, and what we and the folks who steward our natural and working lands can do about it?
Yes. So California, of course, is endowed with incredibly beautiful and incredible diverse ecosystems all across the state. And many of these ecosystems are now facing a challenge, different types of challenge because of climate change, right? Agricultural systems that are experiencing incredible amount of water shortage, for example, that's complicating not just food production, but also maintaining health of that ecosystem, right? On the other hand, we see the fires and floods and different types of ecosystems that are also hugely challenging. Of course, catastrophic fires that we're now witnessing all over the place all the time remove a lot of carbon from ecosystems. The combustion itself, of course, from the vegetation and topsoil. But even beyond that, they have incredibly significant and long-lasting implications for ecosystem health, right? Because one, for example, you can think about the post-fire runoff that occurs, all sorts of mass movement, landslides that are triggered by fires that have caused significant amount of land degradation in forest ecosystems that are going to be incredibly challenged to recover back to their original state post-fire, with many different pressing challenges, of course. But even, the sedimentation that affects lakes, rivers, reservoirs, and many kind of challenge that have to do with chemical pollution, but also just the sedimentation itself. All of these are incredibly important. I wanted to give you maybe one example of a study we were doing near the crest of the Sierra Nevada at the Yosemite National Park and the Inyo National Forest. This was about a little over a decade ago now, in the extreme change we had from very wet conditions, record wet conditions, and then 2 years after that going to extremely dry conditions. And one thing those studies that we were doing then demonstrated is how these ecosystems get pressed by these extreme swings in climate weather patterns that we're seeing, where going from an extremely wet year to extremely dry conditions and in that ecosystem caused 100% increase in the rate of decomposition of organic matter, meaning loss of carbon that was in soil into the atmosphere. It doubled, while at the same time, plant productivity and the input of carbon from the plants and the atmosphere to the soil decreased by almost half. So as you can imagine, that system's getting hit in two different ways. And this rapid decomposition in this kind of ecosystem that's rich in organic matter, rich wetland soils is what they are basically all across that ecosystem. If they lose all that carbon that fast, you don't end up with just that carbon that returns to the atmosphere. You also end up with reduced water holding capacity for a long, long, long time going forward. So the snowpack that we consider the water towers for the rest of us who live downstream, in the valley in California, its ability to actually hold water and slowly regulate that flow of water down to downstream communities is significantly compromised. And this is a long-lasting problem that once it happens, that's incredibly challenging to address. And add fire to that as another challenge. So all of these are incredibly challenging problems that emphasize, in my opinion, why we need to think about nature-based solutions even more so, especially considering that, about 30% of the cost-effective CO2 mitigation that we need can actually occur with nature-based solutions and has all of these other benefits.
So what I am reading between the lines, what I'm hearing is that we can all be land stewards, right? Even if it's just through composting, right? And so there's so much we can do to support nature so it can support us is also something I'm hearing. So I'd like to end this conversation this morning by asking you to share with us two things. The first, what are some important scientific questions that we need answered when it comes to nature-based climate solutions? And finally, could you share with us something that you are personally really excited about that's happening in research today?
Yeah, thank you. There are a number of things we can talk about in this context, but one of the things that I think are critical questions that we they're pretty urgent for not just scientists, but all of us to address, have to do with things like, once carbon enters the soil, how can we increase how long it actually stays there? So we're not trying to stop decomposition, obviously, a very important ecosystem process, but how can we increase the amount of time it stays there? Because the longer it stays in soil, the better it will contribute to soil health and the less of the climate challenge we have to address. But I think we are fairly confident in, and we know how to increase the amount of carbon coming into soil, but we still have kind of urgent questions to address about how do we increase the length of time it actually stays there and it's stabilized, if you will, in soil. And then also, how do we get a better sense of where the tipping points are, where natural ecosystems go from being net sinks with respect to atmospheric carbon dioxide to net source. And there's a variety of challenges, like we heard earlier, fire and others that could cause this, but where exactly the tipping points are is an extremely, I think, urgent issues to consider and think about. I'm personally excited about a lot of research that has to do with, in my nerdy little world of soil biogeochemistry, I really am excited about deep soil organic matter dynamics, getting a sense of how much carbon stored in deep soils and how vulnerable that might be for climate change, through climate change, for example. I'm also quite excited and fascinated about, many of us, there's some folks in the room here work on this, work that we've been doing on reducing greenhouse gas fluxes, in particular methane, from waste streams and animal production systems, in particular by using a combination of approaches that allow us to not just reduce methane fluxes from, say, compost piles or municipal waste streams, but then also reusing that organic material in agricultural systems to build soil organic matter, to build health and resiliency of soils. So we can talk a long time about this, but we'll watch the time.
Well, I now have your number in my phone. So expect some soil memes. But it is an absolute privilege to be able to have this conversation with you this morning. And thank you all for listening to us. I hope I get to meet some of you guys on the break and enjoy the summit. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you. All right, thank you so much. Well, without further ado, I'm really thrilled to invite Secretary Crowfoot, the Honorable Jane Lubchenco, and Heather Tallis up to the stage. I'm also going to be moving seats around, so I will get them ready for them.
Well, thank you so much. That was a great way to start off the discussion here today. And, scientific underpinnings of this conversation blows my mind. 2/3 of life on Earth depends on the health of soils. Amazing. And there are so many scientists across California and the world that are really helping us understand just how critical it is to bring our systems into balance and improve the health of our lands, including the two women sitting right next to me. We are really fortunate to have two scientists with us, but also national, international leaders on the vanguard of driving nature-based solutions. Dr. Jane Lubchenco is on the faculty at Oregon State University. Many of us knew her long before she knew us when she was administrator of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, during the Obama administration. She then was recruited to help lead the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House as its Deputy Director of Climate and Environment. So Dr. Lubchenco has been driving this movement for well over a couple of decades. Dr. Heather Tallis is a colleague of ours who serves as Senior Fellow at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She comes to that position also from back east, where she was President Biden's advisor on nature, and also Jane's colleague at the Office of Science and Technology Policy. She was lead scientist of the International Nature Conservancy and has been a long-standing leader on this topic as well. So huge thanks both for being with us. What we want to do in this discussion, I'll note something kind of amazing. If you look at the prints if you come up and you meet each of these folks, if you look at the prints, Dr. Lubchenco is wearing a flowering berry, the blueberry, and Dr. Tallis, Heather, is wearing a pollinator. So without coordinating, they're actually living our topic here today. Nerds. So what we want to do over the next 45 minutes is open the aperture a little bit, understand what's been happening outside of California, both on the national level and the international level, have a conversation, and then if we have time too, I'll jump in the crowd and do my Oprah Winfrey and go around and take a couple questions and answers. So first to you both, help us understand, because a lot of us, part of today is all about bringing cohesion to folks that are working in urban forestry or regenerative agriculture or nature conservation, trying to get our arms around nature-based solutions, and how do we try to advance this as a domain and as a sort of a sector. So can you talk about the work that you did at the national level to try to bring some cohesion to this topic?
Okay, I'll start. Hi, everybody. It's so exciting to be here. I just love all of the work that you are engaged in, and having it all come together to celebrate the successes and think about what's next is spectacular. So first and foremost, congratulations on what you all are doing. It's so incredibly important, and it's just a treasure to join you. When Heather and I were in the White House, I was there from 2021 to 2025, we really had a major goal, among lots of other things, of we were in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and so the idea is to bring science into policy. So we did science for policy as well as policy for science. The nature goal that we had was really to bring nature from the margins, as you were saying in your opening remarks, Wade, really front and center, to mainstream nature across federal policies and practices. So what does that mean? It's a lot of things. A lot of the conservation movement has really focused on 30 by 30, protecting 30% of the lands and the waters by 2030. That's a California goal, it's a US goal, it is an international goal. We realized that mainstreaming nature was not just about 30 by 30. As important as that is, we really needed to take a 100% approach. Because what happens in the other 70% of areas that are not set aside as protected areas is critically important. And if we want to stem the loss of biodiversity, if we want to reap the benefits that nature has to offer us, we really have to pay attention to all of nature. And I love the Gary Snyder quote, nature is home. And home is everywhere, and nature is everywhere. And so we systematically went about thinking, how do we do a better job of connecting the dots between nature and human health, nature and the economy, nature and climate solutions, nature and equity, nature and national security. There's strong connections. Nature is at the center of all those. And so mainstreaming nature to us meant connecting the dots across all those different domains. I'll talk about a couple of things we did and then do a handoff to Heather to talk about a couple of the other things. One of them was to put nature on the economic balance sheet of the country. Right now, all of our economic indicators, they sort of assume nature is going to be there, it's always going to be there, it's always going to do what it does, and yet most of our economy is based on nature, but we don't account for that in our economic indicators. If you want to know how the economy is doing, you look at GDP, you look at job numbers, you look at inflation. Nowhere in there is there a direct accounting for nature. And so we started something called natural capital accounting, which is creating accounts for a number of different, their land accounts, their water accounts, their ocean accounts, their air accounts, and to systematically create those accounts and enable them to be able to talk to our existing economic accounts and environmental statistics is a work in progress. We made some very significant headway. It is continuing today. It has not been stopped. And it is a multi-year effort. It took us 10 years to figure out how to measure GDP. So we're not going to figure out how to do natural accounts overnight. So it's a process. And that was one example, connecting the dots between nature and the economy. Another example was to connect the dots between nature and national security. When countries around the world are losing their nature is degraded, there is increasing poverty and civil strife, and that translates to both migrations as well as national security challenges. And so for the first time ever, biodiversity and the language that we used was natural security, was in the national security strategy. So connecting the dots to different communities was part of what we were doing. We thought it was really important to embrace nature-based solutions, and I'm going to do a handoff to Heather to talk about that and the National Nature Assessment that we started, because both of those were efforts that she led. So, over to you.
Thank you, Jane. Am I on?
Yes.
And thank you, Secretary, for including us in this important conversation, and thank you all for coming today. As Jane said, and as you said in your opening remarks, of course, nature is embedded in most everything we're trying to do, whether or not we want it to be, and whether or not we think about it that way. And so not thinking about it just means it's going to take longer. We might not get where we want to go. It's going to cost more money. It's going to be really frustrating. We're going to make people angry. And we have another option, which is to think about nature as part of the solutions, as part of the options we have for what we're investing in, what we're trying to do, especially when it comes to climate change. And that was something that very luckily there was recognition of at the federal level in the last administration. I will just pause to say, when I started my own education in environment, I'm also a biogeochemist, nerds unite. I never thought that there would be a U.S. administration in my lifetime that led with an environmental issue at the top of their agenda. And when climate change was at the top of an agenda, I was shocked and super excited, and so agreed to go join the administration. But it was climate change and not climate and nature. But there was enough of a recognition there that nature had to be part of the solution, that's what we had a big opportunity to act on. And so one of the things that we were able to do through an executive order was come up with a national roadmap for accelerating investments in nature-based solutions for climate and for equity and for resilient communities and economic prosperity. So climate was an important entry point for us to recognize the very intense embeddedness of nature in everything that we're trying to do. And while the recognition is there, it's still super hard work. And there's barriers all over the place. And so the process I was able to be a part of was to work with 15 agencies across the federal government to listen to them, identify what their barriers were to doing more with nature today. And then to make a set of recommendations across all the major actions of government for how we can do that work differently, how we can remove those barriers, and how we can make it much easier for people to think about nature as part of the solution. And so there's a lot of recommendations in that roadmap. Some of them were immediately acted on as part of that effort, and I'll mention just a couple that Jane flagged. But there's much more there that's incredibly relevant still at the federal level and to states that really recognizes the levers that we have across government to make it much, much, much easier to do this work now, and that we need to remove if we're going to get where we're trying to go. So I recommend everyone to still look at it. One that I'll mention that we might come back to was some guidance that came out on benefit cost analysis. Super boring sounding topic.
Deeply nerdy.
Maybe nerdier than soil. And I now see it as this phenomenal superpower. It is I can use this reference in California. You all know what sneaker waves are. It is the sneaker wave of nature policy.
Okay.
Because benefit cost analysis for federal agencies is required for every major decision of a funding program or a regulatory change. Agencies must conduct a benefit cost analysis to make a case that what they're proposing to do has costs that are justified by the benefits that will be provided to society from that use of our taxpayer dollars. And in the normal dominant use of those methods, most of the things that happen to nature when you make a decision don't count. So the health impacts of air pollution did until recently. And the climate change impacts of, for example, making a large development and clearing those wetlands that Esme was talking about that are so effective didn't count. You didn't see that cost. So it can look great to make most of the decisions that we've made without lying about anything, right? Just by following the standard economic methods that are recommended by the government. Those are not the best practice methods of economics today. And we had not updated our federal guidance on how to do those analyses transparently and effectively for 40 years. And so the update happened and the guidance was published, and it gave very, very clear methods for how any agency can account for the costs and benefits that are caused through changes in nature for any kind of decision. And those were adopted, and they were recommended to all the agencies by the Office of Management and Budget that sets those standards for the United States. So that is a massive power play opportunity, right? To just be able to say, let's take the blinders off on what is really happening. Just because we don't count those changes doesn't mean they're not happening. They're happening every time we make a decision, but we don't see them. in front of us when we're making that call. So that's a super, super important change to happen. Those guidelines have been revoked. You can still read them and follow them at a state level. Anybody can. So that was one thing that was recommended in the roadmap that was actually implemented. The other I'll mention briefly was the establishment of the first ever national assessment of the state of nature in the United States. So again, this is an issue of visibility, right? If we don't know what's going on in a consensus way in the environment around us, and we don't know what all of the scientists and all of the knowledge holders agree that means for the economy and for the climate, it's hard to make a better choice. And the United States has never done a consensus assessment of the state of nature and its effects on society. And so we initiated that through some of the efforts in the White House. And it began in earnest with huge support from the U.S. Global Change Research Program, which is the entity in the government that facilitates that kind of research. They also produced, as many of you probably know, the National Climate Assessment. But again, we had nothing similar for nature, and so they initiated that with great support across federal agencies. Unfortunately, that was stopped at the beginning of last year, but there was so much enthusiasm from the author team and from some of the previous leaders that we pivoted that to a non-federal effort, and it's still continuing now under Jane's leadership and mine in a larger group called the Nature Record. And we have at least one author in the room, and maybe a couple more that I haven't had the chance to meet yet. But this is a huge effort of almost 200 scientists across the nation and indigenous knowledge holders who are bringing together a consensus understanding of what we know about the state of nature and how it is affecting our climate and our economy and our communities. So another important effort that's shining a light on how nature is connected to everything. And giving us the basis of knowledge to act from so that we can do much more and go much further faster with nature-based solutions and other approaches.
Wade, could I just make a quick public service announcement? The Nature Record, of which Heather just spoke, the draft that all these authors have been working madly on for the last couple of years will be out for public comment March, April, and May of this year. So if you go to the website, thenaturerecord.org, you can, there will be information there that enables public comment. We're also doing public engagement events around the country. And the report will go to the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine for a formal scientific peer review. And we expect the Nature Record to be out next fall. It'll be available. So exciting, stay tuned, but help shape it, help make it as good as it can be.
It's pretty incredible to hear that you attempted such ambitious paradigm shift at this huge scale of the federal government. A couple of takeaways that I have that hopefully everybody around the room can take home is one, all of our responsibility to mainstream nature. You'd expect a conversation on nature to take place in an agency like the Natural Resources Agency, but Jane, the point you make is, the health of nature and our natural systems impacts all dimension of life and society. And a lot of these areas that you don't think about, like national security, for example, or for some, the economy. So I think one of the pieces of work that we all have to do is to help everybody, even if they don't consider themselves an environmentalist or somebody that likes nature, to actually understand the role of healthy lands, healthy nature around them, whether they're in a big city or on the farm or in a rural area. Another key takeaway is just the importance of institutionalizing nature. You make the point that we've been degrading our nature, polluting, extracting resources, and all of our economic measures show growth and productivity. But all of those environmental impacts have been externalized from that measurement, those calculations. And you all went so far as to really do the work, building a methodology to integrate nature and the health of nature, actually what it means, dollars and cents, to our economy, which is just pretty incredible. And then this working across agencies, probably transportation agencies, infrastructure agencies that you'd never think have a role in protecting, conserving nature, but rely on it. you've got, you've institutionalized this roadmap to see themselves. And I think for the people who raised your hands in the room from state government, it's a challenge to us. Look, these are dark, well, speaking for myself, these are dark times in the federal government, and we've seen the scrubbing of climate data and environmental data and the dismantling and the gutting out of environmental agencies. But the pendulum will swing back, and it will swing back faster than many of us could anticipate. And the fact is, we in California play a role being a big government, a big economy to actually integrate this work. So to me, it's remarkable at this huge national scale, the federal scale, you've developed these frameworks. And what I want to take, from this conversation is like, let's figure out if we can drive this forward in California. Because when we have a federal administration that is supportive of this work, and no doubt the challenges, the climate challenges and risks are becoming greater, so this is essential work for the future, we'll be further along because California helped to institutionalize it. So huge thanks on that.
California did that with climate change. And has long been a leader in that space, as you and Amanda had indicated. But states are the opportunity. I mean, it's a cauldron of creativity. You can try things out. And the diversity of habitats, of landscapes, of systems in California really gives you a leg up. And so to pioneer approaches or adopt them from elsewhere, that I think the states and local communities are where the action is for real creativity in finding solutions that work.
Yeah, it's incredible. Let's open up the aperture even beyond the United States to the world. You both do a lot of work internationally. What's the vibe check across planet Earth on nature-based solutions? Is it a small group of people huddled in an academic institution talking about it? Are other governments embracing it? Where do you see progress or areas of leadership?
I can start. Well, I feel like there's sort of two bizarre parallel universes happening right across the world right now. There's the rhetoric that is getting super terrifying, right? Where people are using the current economic and political and social instability to really rapidly try to undo decades of progress. So we had the European Union pushing very hard, including on the United States in every global negotiation in the last administration, to do more with the private sector to disclose nature-related financial risks and supply chains, and to put border taxes on carbon, and to make really substantial changes. They are backpedaling fast, right, from those kinds of laws and commitments. And I don't know how many of you saw or heard Carney's speech at Davos last week. Super impressive, right, to me, very compelling. And I heard this week that in response to him calling his nation into power, mining companies in BC are trying to remove the rights of Indigenous peoples recognition and weaken environmental regulations so that they can go faster and meet the Prime Minister's call. So this moment is being used to really try to tell an old story that we know leads not where we want to go, right? And California has a huge opportunity, as do other countries, to keep telling a different story about what the economic opportunity is that we have right now. The other track is that many other countries and major global finance institutions are investing in nature like crazy, in the billions of dollars order of magnitude, because it has been proven in so many cases that that's good business. And that's what makes sense for resilient infrastructure, resilient water systems, thriving local communities. They're not talking about it as loudly, but the money is still going in disproportionately large amounts into nature-based solutions where they have been proven. And just as an example, I was involved for many years while I was still at the Nature Conservancy in water funds in Latin America, which is an investment mechanism where water users pay into a fund that's used to invest in watershed management to improve water supplies, reduce sedimentation into irrigation ditches, reduce water treatment costs at facilities, keep sediment out of reservoirs for hydropower. That mechanism has now been adopted in many, many places, and major financial institutions like the Inter-American Development Bank now regularly make water infrastructure loans to nature, to invest in nature, not for conservation, not for a social right to operate, for water infrastructure. That is regular practice at the billions of dollars scale in multiple continents. So that's happening alongside this very different dialogue and rhetoric that's happening also in the international arena that I think is going to be a really critical thing to keep countering, with reality and dollars on the ground to keep driving what people have really recognized is a viable economic path forward.
I think we're really living with the legacy of the framing that we have to choose between the economy and the environment. And that's just so misdirected, misguided, and wrong. But it has, it still, people go back to that framing and sort of jump on that bandwagon. And so the real opportunity is to do what California did with climate, which is to prove that you can reduce emissions while your economy is growing. And that was such a powerful thing for California to do. And people took notice. And so part of changing the framing and the paradigm is not just words, it's proof. And so, the power of what you all are doing with nature-based solutions is a demonstration of what is possible. And that can be inspiring. Courage is contagious. And people want to, what you want is for others to say, hey, I want some of that. When we announced that we were doing nature-based solutions, when we announced that we were going to do natural capital accounting, putting nature on the balance sheet of the US, other countries came to us and said, hey, we're interested in doing that. Can we have conversations with you? Can we do an MOU with you? Because we want to learn as you are doing this, because we want to do the same. And so this is a time of partnership, and that partnership is also still continuing. They have been meeting. And it, I think, tells you that there is appetite. It's just not the noise that we're hearing. And so now is the time for action to provide that proof of concept and to inspire people about what is possible across all the different habitats, across all the different communities, urban, rural, everything, I think, is really exciting.
It's really, really exciting, and this conversation is achieving what I hoped it would, which is connecting the work that each of us do with this global impact and this global effort. And what I love about these nature-based solutions is they work locally and they work globally, right? So whether you're providing shade for kids in South LA, or whether you're expanding sustainable ranching and farming in the Central Valley, or whether you're protecting watersheds in the Sierra Nevada and reducing catastrophic wildfire, that's just good to do to protect Californians. But when we aggregate it all together and integrate it with our other work, we're showing the world that taking this action is not only, locally beneficial, but really important for the future of our state, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. So, I think nature is one of the most powerful allies that we have in the fight against climate change. And nature has power to deliver on the three major climate fronts. One is reducing emissions, so we can switch to solar, to solar, wind, and have clean energy. Two is removing carbon from the atmosphere, because it's not going to be enough just to reduce emissions. We're going to actively have to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. Nature can help with that, whether it's forests or seagrass beds or salt marshes. And three, building our resilience into our ecosystems and our communities, and whether it's shade trees or whatever. So nature is really powerful solution for climate, but it's so much more. And so when I think of nature-based solutions, it's not just nature-based climate solutions, it's nature-based solutions for human health, for the economy, for national security, for equity. So I think part of our opportunity here is to embrace nature-based solutions for climate, but recognize that there's solutions to lots of other challenges that we have. And what an amazing opportunity that is. One of the things we talked about, Wade, were impediments, and part of what the nature-based solutions roadmap that Heather led was to say, okay, what are the impediments? What are the roadblocks? Why can't we make more? California has this really ambitious nature-based solutions strategy. Amanda gave a really nice update, and I love the accountability of having to report every 2 years. That's being transparent. That's holding yourselves accountable. But what, given what you've seen, are the major impediments to doing more? Are you hopeful that 59% is on target? But what are the big challenges? What is keeping you up at night, Wade? What when you think about the challenges, what do we need to do to remove those? How can we break through some of that?
Yeah, well, I'm jumping off the stage after talking to you and going back to Washington, D.C. to try to negotiate the Colorado River shortage. So that's what's keeping me up at night as of last night. But no, look, I think the sober reality that right now our lands need help in California. The catastrophic wildfires that we had over the last decade, the emissions, the pollution that emitted largely swamped all of the savings that we achieved through incredible environmental policies and programs. So unless and until we help our lands be healthier, we're not going to actually achieve what we need to achieve towards carbon neutrality. And this scale, those numbers that Amanda showed are big numbers. There's so much incredible work that's happening, but I want to avoid random acts of conservation, random acts of nature-based solutions. So I think we have a real challenge in front of us around scale. We know healthy soils works. It works for farmers because it helps retain their most important asset, which grows their crops, the soil. It helps retain water, which is increasingly variable in California. It's totally setting aside its ability to sequester carbon. We know that greening a schoolyard protects kids from a climate in Los Angeles that over time is going to look more like the climate in Phoenix. But we have to achieve scale. The number on the acres that we have to prevent catastrophic wildfire on is 33 million acres. That's a third of our state. So from my perspective, we made a lot of progress. One, recognizing the role that lands play. Two, funding. But now we have to achieve scale. So it's more funding sources, it's cutting red tape to get projects done more quickly. It's building a movement. And here's the not so secret. Part of the reason why we're trying to, have this summit and have these summits is government agencies, even as powerful as the federal government, are not doing this alone. This is an all of society effort. So we need local communities, we need local businesses, we need agricultural producers, we need everybody on this. And so I think scale is really important. I think the other big one, Heather, that you alluded to is silos. I've talked to so many philanthropic funders over the years that say, I'm a nature conservation funder, I don't do climate, right? Yep. And I'm ready to throw a drink on the next person that tells me that. But we still have a lot of that, and I think a lot of our government agencies haven't historically seen themselves and their role in this. So I think we have to continue to break down silos. And it's not making every sort of project the perfect project, but it's understanding. Our government spends $250 billion a year of taxpayer funds on California, infrastructure, programs, et cetera. Let's really orient that as much as possible to win-win nature-positive solutions. So that's sort of what keeps me up at night, is how we break down this bureaucratic inertia and integrate, right? Create less silos.
Heather, can you say something about how some of the bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act funds, which was a big bucket, were spent in ways that achieve some of what Wade is talking about, to cut across those silos? And some agencies, departments that might have been surprising really jumped on this, and they found opportunities to do nature-based solutions.
Yeah, I'll just second, we can maybe throw drinks together. I heard in the last year, a huge private sector investor that's like leading the force and investing in climate offsets say, we invest in trees, we don't invest in nature. So we have some ways to go. We have some ways. But there are a lot of people who do get it more, and so I'll mention one cross-cutting thing and then several agencies that unlocked an insane amount of money for nature through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. One action was from the Office of Management and Budget, again, one of the agencies you've never heard of that is massively influential. They wrote a directive to all agencies spending any of the money from either of those laws on infrastructure to spend that on resilient infrastructure. And there was specific guidance in that directive to consider and prioritize nature-based solutions when they were relevant. So that was a signal to Department of Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, Department of Defense, Health and Human Services, everybody who's managing a building, a piece of infrastructure in any way, and spending money from either of those laws, who was asked to think about nature-based solutions, make sure it was something they were considering, and when they could, prioritize those. So that's a huge signal that was sent, again, across the government. So who cares about the silos? We get it that infrastructure is infrastructure and that nature can help. So let nature help.
So that's scaling.
That's scaling.
It is scale.
And that can happen in a state too. And so I'll just mention, a couple specific programs then that did it and who had already been doing it and could really run, when that directive came. So Department of Transportation, has been allowing and encouraging the use of natural habitat along roadways in pollinator strips and other versions to reduce erosion risk, to absorb pollution off of roadways and reduce their needs for remediation for a long time. So through one of those laws, the Protect program was created, which is specifically for resilient road infrastructure. And it specifically named nature-based solutions as something you could use that money for. And they put out requests for proposals that called for nature-based solutions and allowed the use of that transportation funding for nature-based solutions. And that was $1 billion a year program.
Amazing.
That's one program, right, in one agency that was the size of the entire commitment of the America the Beautiful funding at the national scale.
That's amazing. And that's really, I'm going to come up for questions, so raise your hand if you have a quick question. That's a great example of where you can leverage existing funding to drive nature-based solutions. Just a couple short questions, 1 and 2, and just take a moment to introduce yourself and then ask a question. Yes.
Rodney Brown, Keeps Global, Kids in Environmental Education Programs and Services in South LA. So we're inspiring our children doing amazing things, and they're very excited about soil. While the grown-ups and we're helping the Altadena and the Palisades with healing the soil, we're teaching the children. So we're here today to find out how can we inspire or partner with other organizations that are in the area while the adults are helping with our program called Safe Soil in Altadena. How can we also partner to inspire these children? And Keeps Global, you can find them on social media, KEEPS Global, and look at what these excited children are doing about learning about education and the environment.
Yeah, one of our key goals today is to build that networks, to build those partnerships. So what would you say about, now your work is obviously more governmental focused, but having dealt with and having partnered with so many, what would you say to community-based organizations that want to figure out, how to build connection with others in their regions?
So those networks are exactly, again, what this is all about, and finding partners that have similar problems and trading intel on what works and what doesn't work can actually be very exciting and very powerful. But seeing the big picture and seeing the key role that you play in that and focusing on kids is just so incredibly important. So Tashonda, if you guys aren't talking, you should be.
Hi, thank you very much for your time today. Melinda Stalvey with Metropolitan Water District. I was really interested in this. It's really frustrating to see that there's this divide between we have to have either or, an economic prosperity or nature-based solutions, and not seeing this as a whole complete product for the world. And you're saying, and it's really hopeful that in this crisis that we're having right now in this political climate, gosh, I'm a nervous wreck. In this political climate, that we're starting to see some private investments that are coming. And how can we get those private investment firms to start speaking up more so that we can get that divide crossed between them, so that it gets to the political party and the political side of things, so that there can be bigger change where we can actually mend that divide. Does that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, we need to applaud them loudly, right, for the efforts that they take to stick their neck out and try something different. And there's lots of opportunity to leverage funding to do that, to provide incentives to do that, to make permitting faster and easier so that they can do things differently. I'll just give one quick story. I met a woman several years ago in Oklahoma who's on a local water board. They had some routine reservoir maintenance that they needed to do. They put out a regular RFP. One of the proposals that they got in had some nature-based features to improve filtration and reduce erosion around the reservoir. They didn't ask for that. They didn't know it was possible. And when they saw that proposal, they knew that's what they wanted. But a private sector firm had to put that on the table. And that, I'm sure, for them was a risk. Am I going to get the bid? Maybe it was a little higher cost bid. This is something they haven't seen before. I'm sticking my neck out here, because I think this is a good plan, but what's going to happen? Are we going to get the job? So governments can signal strongly that those are the kinds of proposals that are going to get traction, or they can incentivize firms to develop alternative business lines, demonstrate projects where nature is part of the solution, so it gets de-risked in the public eye and in the private sector eye, so they're much more willing to put those things forward.
There also are there are a number of coalitions of companies that are really interested in nature-based solutions. And so finding who those are, who the pioneers are. You want to say anything about Capital's Coalition, for example?
Sure, that's a global coalition that's brought together the communities around human capital, economic capital, natural capital, and so on, and really recognizing this integration that is real, and working with a very large global network of businesses who are thinking about and trying to internalize that recognition in their business activities. So there's the UN Global Compact, that's another global network of businesses that are, in different ways trying to figure out how to internalize externalities and provide different business offerings that are beneficial to nature.
Yeah, and I'll say California clearly has some of the richest companies in the world, a lot of whom have really specific commitments to offset their environmental impact. And maybe they're not publicizing it in the current national environment, but they're still focused on it. And in my experience talking to these companies, these big brand name companies, many of them tech companies, a lot of times when they make the investment, they can get criticized for little, this detail or that detail. And ultimately, a lot of companies have become really gun shy with investing in nature-based solutions, investing in nature-based sequestration projects. So I'm with you. We have to really lift up leadership. Great example is Apple invested with an NGO called River Partners to restore a seasonal floodplain north of Sacramento called Dos Rios Norte. Great project that wouldn't have happened without Apple. Imagine if there were hundreds more examples of companies actually stepping up to invest. We have time for one more question, and I see my colleague's hand in the back, so I'm going to let her do this, and this is going to be the speed round.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And a question for you. My name's B'nai Kalak. I'm from the Palma Band of Bayam people. And obviously, Wade will probably cue this in, but 110 tribes here in California, federal recognized, then you have the state recognized. Do you think it's improved, the relationship? Because in the room, there's probably just a couple of us in here that are tribal, but I really want to focus on that. That is where your strength is the relationship with tribes. I mean, I'm echoing probably what Wade is continuously saying, and I really appreciate it, but it's so important because we have a unique status. I mean, we do care about the land. We talk about Mother Earth all the time. And so I know, thankfully, you know, with both of your work, I'm sure it has improved immensely. And I really do appreciate that. But I really would, this is a shout out to everybody, like, let's get that rolling.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and I'll just say that traditional ecological knowledge, tribal practices, the original nature-based solutions, obviously. And one thing we're working on in California is to recognize that, to lift that up, and to center our practices in that. And so for anybody that's not partnering with local tribal governments or local communities in this work, you're missing the boat, because I'm with you. The more, Benet, we can integrate this, well, we just need to. But I'm interested in either of your responses to that too.
No, totally agree. And that was one of the reasons that in the federal government, another thing that Heather and I worked on was to provide guidance to all the federal agencies for the first time ever that said, in addition to using data and evidence and science, which they are required by law to do to make decisions, we elevated indigenous knowledge and created a pathway for federal agencies to understand what that meant and strengthen relationships with both tribes, but also indigenous peoples, because not all indigenous folks are in tribes. So yes, and for nature-based solutions, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I applaud you for bringing this up, an absolutely critical issue, and I think this is also one of your major entry points for scale.
Yeah.
Right? This is, as you mentioned, the development of ideas since time immemorial of how to live differently with nature is held by incredible groups of people still stewarding land, and who could steward much, much more land in California and around the world. I, with some really incredible colleagues, hosted an Economic Futures Summit in San Francisco at the end of last year with Gwen Bridge and James Rattling Leaf Sr., and we called it the Economic Futures Summit to explicitly recognize the importance of elevating indigenous ideas for lands and waters and resource management to show a different way forward. And that's, you know, there were incredible stories there from California and across the US, and we had leaders there from around the world. So they're also hearing Native Californian stories, and they're also sharing ideas for different innovations that can be brought here. So absolutely critical and core to reaching your targets.
Wow. Well, you both travel around the country, around the world, driving this movement forward. It means so much for you to come here today and spend time with us and help us just understand the vastness and the vast progress on this issue. So please join me in thanking these two remarkable leaders here today.
You.
All right, everyone, we're going to take a short stretch break. And don't be late, because at 10:45, we are going to kick off with a video that you do not want to miss. So quick stretch break. See you soon. Like, is my voice working? Do they hear? Okay. I have been asking folks to corral everyone from the atrium into the auditorium, so people will be streaming in. But we're kicking off a really exciting sort of lightning talk on green schoolyards, and we're going to get started with a really beautiful video. So James, if you could cue that up, and then I'll introduce our next speaker.
We're standing at Castellanos Elementary School in the Pico Union neighborhood of Los Angeles. The vast majority of schoolyards here in Los Angeles are covered in asphalt, and that gets hot.
It used to look like less color. Like, I remember having all that being gray. So there's a blacktop over there, and it was very hot.
It was no trees, no plants. Pretty hot and arid, especially as we approach the summer months.
didn't look like this green.
One of the secrets that the Trust for Public Land does when we design green schoolyards is we engage the students, their parents, the teachers, asking them to dream about what a new playground looks like.
They got to come up with some very creative ideas, some that we couldn't quite make happen with having like a live jaguar in our play lot. We also got our families involved to share input and feedback. So everybody's kind of been a part of seeing it come to fruition, and it's been a really exciting process.
I had an opportunity to come here doing the groundbreaking and being able to interact with the parents, the teachers, and the leaders here, knowing their commitment and their passion around this project was an immediate yes from us.
So seeing the ceremony, I kid you not, I was tearing. I was like, oh my God, we are not forgotten. And I think I'm not the only parent that thinks that. To be honest with you, like it didn't cross my mind, or they could do this with that space. So when they reopened this up, my daughter was so excited. She was like, just go run.
The grass itself, our students just love sitting on there, having conversations. It looks like a park that you'd see. The outdoor classroom, it really lends itself well to science, biology specifically, but sometimes it's nice for all of our students just to get outside.
Because some of these kids don't have the space. I go back to those kids because I was one of those kids that lived in an apartment and couldn't play outside. And it just does wonders to your brain to have that space.
It's just a place where you can come and like breathe and relax.
I have to say, I think this has also benefited our attendance for our students because it gives them a good reason to want to be here every day.
From an environmental perspective, we're cooling the property down, we're capturing stormwater. From a public health perspective, we're creating opportunities for kids to be much more active and engaged. And from an educational perspective, we're creating and enriching students with a greater, more fun place to learn. And why not level the playing field?
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. If you don't already know Juan Altamirano, he's the Director of Government Affairs for Trust for Public Land, and he's going to do a whirlwind tour on all things green schoolyards for us. Thanks, Juan.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to Amanda and to Secretary Crowfoot for having us here. I want you to imagine being an 8-year-old stepping outside for recess and feeling the ground beneath your feet burn. No grass, no trees, no shade, just endless asphalt radiating heat. Hot enough to cause third-degree burns. For millions of children, this isn't just an imagination, it's their everyday reality. For millions of children, this is what they experience every single day. So, as Amanda said, my name is Juan Altamirano. I am the Director of Government Affairs for the Trust Public Land. And at TPL, we do something powerful. We bring children's imaginations to life by helping build parks where they need it the most. And it's right there in school playgrounds. Before I dig into my remarks, I want to acknowledge and thank Amy Hutzel at the Coastal Conservancy for being one of the first state agencies that funded one of TPL's first pilot projects in Oakland. This was monumental for the work that has and is taking place now, and also thankful to the Secretary, Governor Newsom, the first partner, and the legislature for helping us get the necessary funding at CAL FIRE to implement the schoolyard program on a statewide level. And CAL FIRE has been one of those agencies that you probably don't think about as an agency that could implement and deliver high value on school playgrounds, but they're one of our most incredible and most valuable partners to delivering this effort and making sure that we have the ability to scale this issue up. So thank you to CAL FIRE for all the work that they're doing. So our work touches on many aspects of this nature-based solutions, but we know that the built environment is key to delivering real and tangible change. Through green schoolyards, we're reaching hundreds of thousands of children, teachers, and entire communities. So why are we doing this? We're transforming scorching hot asphalt schoolyards in underserved communities into vibrant green spaces, places where students and neighbors can enjoy, use, and feel proud of. Our goal is simple but impactful: to provide close-to-home community spaces where people can play, connect, and experience the benefits of nature and the outdoors. Why does this matter, right? We talked about a little bit of why this matters in the context of a world and state scale, but in communities, why does this matter? Because 5% of the nationwide gap in academic achievement between white and black students is attributed to heat and air quality disparities. We know that 1 in 3 children attend schools in heat islands, and researchers have documented schoolyard surface temperatures reaching 145 degrees Fahrenheit on these asphalt playgrounds. That kind of heat can cause third-degree burns and send children from the playground straight to the emergency room. So this is why our work is so important in helping create climate-resilient futures. Most of us have seen firsthand across California, school children often play on these barren asphalt lots. They're prison-like environments, without grass, shade, trees, leaving them exposed to extreme heat and play in spaces vulnerable to flooding. We turn that reality on its head, and we create healthy, resilient playgrounds, landscapes that are filled with native plants and porous surfaces that absorb stormwater and prevent flooding, trees that cool play areas and provide shade from the beating sun. Green schoolyards are a low-cost, highly effective way to make neighborhoods more resilient to climate change. And the benefits go even further. Greening schoolyard improves both the physical and mental health of children while boosting academic performance. Time spent in nature helps reduce anxiety and depression, increases feelings of calm, and strengthen the focus and concentration of school-aged children. Outside of school hours, these green school playgrounds become beloved community parks, boosting community around each other. Communities with parks are cooler in the summer, have cleaner air, and are better prepared for extreme heat and flooding. Yet still, 1 in 3 Californians do not live within a 10-minute walk of a park. But they do live next to a school. And this is where we can make our impact even further. That's why green schoolyards are the solutions that are hiding in plain sight. And we want to make this reality even bigger, scale it up, but we can't do this without, the partnership between the state agencies and the legislature to continue to fund this kind of work. Not just school playgrounds, but also, the nature-based solutions. So thank you so much. I appreciate you all having me, and let's continue doing more schoolyards.
All right, we in state government are able to do the work that we do because of our elected leaders. The governor, our legislature, it's really been a succession of governors that have driven on combating climate change, and a succession of legislatures who have driven on combating climate change that have put us in California as world leaders. And on these topics, as Amanda talked about this morning, the reason why we've been able to fund the improvement of lands and our natural systems, the reason why we have these targets that we're holding ourselves to account is because of the legislature. So it's really fitting that we have one of our key legislative leaders here today on all things climate change. His name is Senator Josh Becker, and he represents a portion of the Bay Area. And in his time in the state Senate, he has been driving on everything from energy to carbon neutrality to pollution reduction, and now he's chair of one of the most important committees on water and natural resources in state government. So I wanted to welcome Senator Becker to the stage.
Everyone. All right. Well, good morning. Thank you to the agency. Thank you to the Trust for Public Lands. Thank you all for having me here today. And I apologize in advance if I set the agenda back a little bit. I appreciate you working me in. And I know in part I'm filling in for Speaker Rivas, who's just been a tremendous, tremendous advocate for nature-based solutions. So we all owe him a big thank you for his focus. And I wish I could stay the whole day. I have some other events actually on energy. But just already meeting, I just met the professor, which was great because I was on the foundation board for UC Merced for 15 years. So to see the research coming out of it is super exciting. And I just, again, grateful to see you all gathered here on this really important question. How can nature be our partner in addressing climate change? And how can we achieve a lot of the co-benefits in the process? Things like biodiversity protection, clean water, higher crop yields, access to nature. As many of you know, last year I chaired the Energy, Utilities, and Communications Committee, and I've spent a lot of time working towards our net zero goals. In particular, over the last 3 years, I worked on 2 bills that aimed to make sure we had a plan for the net in our net zero strategy. What should count as a reduction in atmospheric carbon to balance against the GHG emissions that we are unable to eliminate, and how will we pay for that carbon removal? There's no net zero strategy without carbon removal, but as a state, we're still working on the plan for what that net in net zero is. And nature-based solutions need to be a part of it. Now that I'm going to chair the Committee on Natural Resources and Water this year, I'm excited to continue the work of protecting our natural places, ensuring clean water, and helping to figure out how nature-based solutions fit in to our broader climate strategy. I want to be sure to acknowledge the incredible work and really important work of the administration in the resources space. There's been so much important progress, and I actually don't think the administration and all the agencies have gotten even enough credit for all the work that's been done over the last 7 years. All that's been done towards 30 by 30, clean water, wildfire mitigation, returning land to tribes, dam removal in the Klamath, bringing salmon back to the Russian River, so much more. In particular, I do have to give a special shout out to Secretary Crowfoot. Yeah, listen. For his leadership in the state and also globally. I get to see, for example, at the last COP in Rio and Belém, I get to see how he's viewed on the global stage and the importance of his work and how his work and the work of this administration is recognized as leading the country and really leading the world. So thank you for your efforts there. I also did get a chance to work on some of this as chair of the budget subcommittee. So for 2 years, I chaired the budget subcommittee that works with the resources agency. So I'm going to take a little credit as well for some of it. Anyway. But also, thank you for the green schoolyards. I love all that work. Urban forests and green schoolyards, something I'm really passionate about. Got to do some of that on Martin Luther King Day in some of our local schools. Anyway, this conference is about nature-based solutions. So I'm going to try to give a substantive conversation on this and how it relates to some of the work I've done. So the term nature-based solutions gets used a lot, and we need to be clear about what we mean. What problem exactly are we solving, and how do we hold projects accountable for delivering the promised results? There's a danger here that nature-based solutions could just mean any project, any conservation project looking for funding. When I think about nature-based solutions, I think of three categories of solutions. First, they're solutions that help us reduce the net emissions from natural and working lands. For example, increasing droughts have been causing wildfires and loss of carbon stocks of forests. Managing the land better, of course, as you all know, can reduce those losses and possibly make natural lands a carbon sink rather than a source of carbon emissions that would make getting to net zero even harder. Second, some nature-based solutions can remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it away as a sort of negative emission that can counteract emissions from the use of fossil fuels. We will not be able to reduce our emissions to zero, so any plan to get to net zero, again, requires these kinds of solutions. Third, some nature-based solutions are helping us prevent climate change. Some are not helping us prevent climate change, but they may help us adapt better to the problems that climate change will bring, such as protecting our coasts from sea level rise or holding more water in our soils, even as climate change causes more severe droughts. And all of these are important. Most of my legislative work has focused on the second category, how we remove carbon from the atmosphere to undo the damage caused by fossil fuel emissions. So we're going to focus on that. And I think the attraction of nature-based solutions for that problem is twofold. For many people, the attraction is the co-benefits. We've been working very hard to protect natural lands, maintain biodiversity, long before we became worried about climate change. So climate solutions that can also have these co-benefits are a win-win. However, for preventing climate change, the more important attraction is that there's nothing remotely as cost-effective and scalable for drawing carbon out of the atmosphere as natural processes. According to NOAA, and I understand you had a conversation here, NOAA, which until recently studied climate science, and I look forward to going back and watching your conversation here, but 11 to 12 gigatons a year of net CO2 are absorbed on land into vegetation and soils. And another 9 to 10 gigatons a year are absorbed into the oceans. That's enormous, and we get almost all of that for free. Unfortunately, it can't keep up with the almost 35 gigatons we add to the atmosphere every year, mostly from burning fossil fuels. So the question is, can we protect and manage our lands here in California in ways that use photosynthesis and natural mineralization processes to increase that drawdown of carbon? Most of the drawdown is free and happening already, so we can only take credit for drawdown that is additional to what would have happened anyway. This question of additionality has been a big concern for voluntary carbon markets and even carbon credits issued according to our own more stringent cap and invest rules. Have we actually achieved a goal if we protect an acre of forest in one place only to have a different acre logged somewhere else instead? And there's another challenge we should focus on a lot in the legislature's consideration of carbon removal. How can we make sure the extra carbon we are drawing down is kept out of the atmosphere for a very long time, for hundreds of years? The question of durability is extremely important, especially if we're crediting any carbon removal pathway with offsetting some of our fossil fuel emissions. Those emissions are adding carbon into the atmosphere that was sequestered underground for millions of years, and that CO2 will naturally remain in the atmosphere for centuries. Imagine if a polluter buys an offset from a project that draws that extra carbon down into agricultural soil that is being managed in a way to increase its carbon content. Problem solved? Well, not if the extra carbon is only retained in the soil for 5 years and then released. In that case, we've let the polluter off the hook, but we've got that extra carbon dioxide back in the air, contributing to warming, and there's no responsible party to fix the problem. It's like a massive new orphan wells problem, and taxpayers will be on the hook to pay for the cleanup. To fully counterbalance fossil fuel emissions, we need confidence that we're doing additional drawdown of carbon and that the storage of that carbon is very long-lasting. So my first challenge to all of you here today is to think about what is required for natural solutions to meet that bar in this category, my category 2. Some nature-based solutions clearly can meet that bar. For example, enhanced mineralization using rocks spread across farmlands is a particularly nature-based approach that clearly can demonstrate additionality and durability while possibly improving the production of farms. Reforestation may be another good example, but we need to put the right framework in place to guarantee that the ongoing protection of the forest for more than 100 years, which can be challenging at times. So I think we need to honestly assess whether many nature-based solutions are meeting those criteria for additionality and durability. If not, they may still be providing valuable benefits by net reducing emissions from natural lands or improving adaptation, but they should not be treated as offsets or financed using an offsets mechanism. Since they are not removing carbon from the atmosphere in a way that is equivalent to emissions from fossil fuels, we should not credit them as if they were. So how should we think about the value of these solutions? And this is my second challenge for all of you today. How can we separate this broad concept of nature-based solutions into categories based on the problem each is solving for us? And then how do we establish funding mechanisms for different types of solutions? Different types of solutions that are linked to the benefits being provided. For the ones that remove and store carbon and fully offset fossil fuel emissions, we can fund those through established offset mechanisms. But we really should not do that for other types of nature-based solutions that cannot meet strict standards of equivalence, because then we'd be letting polluters off the hook by letting them claim to be offsetting their emissions with approaches that are not truly undoing the damage. So how can we fund nature-based solutions that should not qualify as offsets, but help us reduce land-based emissions? I think we need some new ideas on this. As a member of the legislature, I have a duty to my constituents and to the citizens of California to make sure we're spending public dollars prudently and to make sure we're doing that, make sure that if we say we're going to get to net zero by 2045, we're actually doing that in a way that's scientifically valid. My colleagues and I think that nature-based solutions can and should be a big part of getting to net zero. And we need to understand which projects are delivering real value and providing lasting benefits as we allocate public money to supporting these efforts, or as we enable mechanisms like offsets within Cap and Invest to channel funding to these projects. Today, these issues are still a bit unclear. The questionable benefits of many projects that have been credited to voluntary carbon markets has put the whole field under a microscope. I think this gives us an opportunity right now, right here, because we need nature-based solutions, but we need solutions with integrity that meet these standards of additionality and durability. So I'm glad you're all working on this. Looking forward to hearing about all that's discussed today and all the research that you all are doing. And I look forward to a partnership, and for hopefully you will come to me and my colleagues in the legislature so you could help educate us on all the tremendous work that is being done out there in the community. But thank you. Leveraging nature, solving climate, capturing co-benefits, we have to figure out how to make this all work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Becker. We are going to have a large roundtable dialogue discussion, so if I might ask Bruce, Christine, Hayden, Julie, and Ashley to come on up. Really excited. This is a group of leaders out across California implementing nature-based solutions and driving progress forward. So thank you all for coming. Go ahead and have a seat. There's mics on every chair, and hopefully they work. If they don't, we'll solve it.
Hi, everyone. There we go. Thank you to all the speakers who came before us for setting the stage for this panel today. Before we head you off to lunch, we are going to give you a lot of substance to chew on over that lunch as we talk about actual projects on the ground by these leaders that we see throughout California implementing nature-based solutions. So really appreciate all of you being here today. I have to say, as a work-from-home person, being in the warm embrace of all of these nature people is just filling me with a lot of happiness. So thank you to Amanda for putting this day together, and all of you for being here today. So we have 4 different presenters today who are going to talk about the work that they do on the ground, the opportunities they see for expanding nature-based solutions, and the challenges that they have met in implementing these projects. And just thinking about how all of us can work together to help meet those challenges and deliver on these promises that we make both with funding from the legislature and policies from both the legislature and the governor's office, and just how we can do more of this work. As we hear, it's easy to slice and dice projects based on whether they are adaptive or resilience-based or mitigation-based. But some of these projects are all of those things, and they're providing community benefits and jobs and so many of the things that our communities need beyond just counting emissions reductions. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and hopefully inspire you to plan more of these projects and go to Senator Becker and ask for more money for them. So our speakers today, in order, are Julie Rentner, over here, president of River Partners, and that's a California nonprofit with a mission to create wildlife habitat for the benefit of people and the environment. And Julie works in partnership with a ton of different people, so she'll give us a snapshot of some of that through her projects. Next is Christine Gemperle. Did I say that right? Okay. And she's been farming almonds since 1998. She runs a 135-acre farm along with her brother, just the 2 of them. So she knows everything about operations and how to make these solutions work. Hayden Young is a Conservation Corps member who's worked with the Conservation Corps in both Chico and Camarillo, and he'll talk to us about fighting fires and actual nature-based work on the ground and training new Corps members as well to get out on the ground. And last we'll have Bruce Durbin. He is both a supervising regional planner in LA and a member of the Laipe Nation of San Isabel. And so he does a ton of work at the tribal level and at the jurisdictional level with LA. And they'll each give us examples of real work on the ground and how you all can get involved with more of that. So Julie, please kick us off.
All right, yes. Warm embrace. It's so fun to be with you all these nature people. And I gotta say, I often leave out my soil science chops when I write a bio because I think it's too dorky and nobody's gonna care. But like soil people, yes. I went to grad school studying soil science and agricultural studies. Love, love, love everything about it. But yes, it's not the most sexy part of what we do. So I have some videos, some photos to share with you of some amazing floodplain restoration projects. But this is what my contribution to the conversation is today, is we are River Partners as boots on the ground in large-scale floodplain restoration for California. So all of our river valleys have this really important function that we are only coming to realize is critical to the sustained production in our economy and our water systems, which is we have these floodplains where rivers overtop, overbank, spread out across the landscape and sink in. And because we've drained them off over the course of the last 200 years, really substantially, we've lost this very important climate-related and resiliency-related function of our water system. So we're working hard to replumb our water system with nature-based solutions, bringing floodplains back to life. This is a picture of Dos Rios State Park, the first new state park California launched in 10 years, and it highlights the water stories, right, of California, what it looks like in a drought and what it looks like in a flood, and how we can put the excess water in those big abundant flood years back into the ground where we can use it. But the benefits are far beyond just water. As we've been talking about today, a lot of deploying and scaling nature-based solutions is about relationships, communities, making sure that all the people included in the nature can contribute and are part, and this makes nature-based solutions durable. So this is just a before and after of a floodplain restoration project where you can see the before of the Sacramento River, kind of narrow blue line. This is how we tend to think about rivers in our river valleys. But when you can reconnect the floodplain, you see this, seasonally, this river, which is muddy and brown in the wintertime on purpose. That's how all of our ecology is adapted, can spread across the landscape, and that water can be put to good use instead of being a hazard for downstream communities where it causes a lot of damage. Some of our work, well, let me just go back to flood really fast. And when Heather said sneaker wave of cost benefit analysis, that's like, that was going off in my head like, oh, that's what flood is for us, right? When you really like look at the numbers about how damaging floods are in California, how much money it costs us to recover from big floods in California. The cost to do nature-based flood management is orders of magnitude smaller than what we pay in flood damages. So just got to say, like, when we're making the case for nature-based solutions, floodplains and the avoided damages of flooding is one of our strongest cases. But River Partners, and this is the next slide, River Partners started at wildlife. And as somebody who cares about soil and plants, I've never really been a big wildlife person. I learned quickly that this is how this is how you get people to care about soil and water, is with beautiful wildlife. River Partners was founded by farmers in the Central Valley, and the way that some of our founding board members and founders talked about the launch of River Partners in 1998 was they said, look, we noticed that we were losing our wildlife. We noticed that farming in the valley, we didn't have riparian songbirds anymore. We couldn't go fishing in the river anymore. Even some of our insects were declining, and so we want to bring that back. So this is a way that we get into talking about how people connect with nature, but it's so much deeper than this. Next slide. So, River Partners is doers. We don't work a lot in trying to change policy and regulation. There's enough of that going on, but the amazing work of all the people in the room and so many more. We get the work done, and so getting the work done for us gives us a really nice perspective on what the obstacles are to delivering this important nature-based solution and scaling it up. This is a picture of getting it done, and what you're looking at is removing a bunch of concrete rubble that have been dumped in the San Joaquin River over the last 60 years, and an enormous 2,000-acre reforested floodplain. What we've observed in trying to put together big projects like this that take many years to deliver and many millions of dollars, and Secretary Crowfoot mentioned like the partnerships involved in putting all those dollars together are not just public, but they're also private. Some of the obstacles that we face are around this theme that we've already talked about silos, about having to bring, one project that's multi-million dollars in many years takes funding from 9 different funding sources. And there's a lot of just mobilization and administrative costs that comes along with that could be fixed if we had specific funding programs that supported nature-based solutions holistically. And then one of the other really big kind of obstacles, but also opportunities for deploying this nature-based solution is around human connection. So we spend a huge amount of our time at River Partners mulling on, getting strategic about how do you invite people into nature. And it's a lot more than just passive hiking trails or bird watching. Especially across agricultural valleys, you invite people into nature by providing jobs, planting trees, collecting native seed. You invite people into nature also by supporting restoration of culture. So we've been on this incredible learning journey with our agricultural neighbors, with our flood engineering neighbors, with our water supply and groundwater neighbors, and now with our tribal neighbors, who are teaching us so much about the ecology of California that us Western trained scientists never even thought of or noticed, because their connection to nature and to our dynamics are just deeper from a foundational level of feeding and clothing and ceremony and song. Finding ways to bring all of those different communities into partnership to deliver this nature-based solution takes funding, financing, and time, which are a whole bunch of things that are in short supply for delivering and scaling up on this. So I look forward to the rest of the dialogue. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Julie. So one idea that we can chew on after this is there a way to create a bucket that would be transformative climate funding for nature-based solutions? In the same way we funded at the neighborhood level through the TCC program, could we do this for a nature project so that Julie doesn't have to go to the Department of Water Resources, to the CEC, to DWR, to DFW, to multiple other agencies to gather all that funding? Could we have one bucket of funding because we know that nature provides all those benefits, and we use one way of measuring those benefits and reporting back and showing that demonstration. So, that's something we definitely need in this space. Christine, please.
Well, I'm going to give you guys a lot of information about what's going on our farm and a lot of farms in the Central Valley. I'm an almond farmer, and I'm going to talk about hedgerows and cover crops, groundwater recharge, and whole orchard recycling. And I'll start here with hedgerows. I did not expect that hedgerows would make a big difference in my farming operation. I just thought it was going to be, providing more biodiversity for the valley, supporting different species. But what I found was completely different. In supporting bird species, now I have a ton of birds on my property, which is incredible. A lot of bird poop. But what I found, we have this pest, and it overwinters in the old nuts that don't make it out of the orchard, and it takes all this work to clean them up and grind them up, and sometimes it's hard to get it done and not damage your cover crop that you're trying to plant. But what I found is all these birds that were coming were actually going into my orchard and cleaning them up for me. So not only were they eating the nut, but in many cases, when the nut was actually gross, too gross to be eaten by anything other than a decomposer, they would actually find the worm, the navel orange worm, and peck it out and eat it. And so they were actually doing labor for me for free, kind of, I don't think I was exploiting them or anything, but because I was providing housing and food. So huge benefits. It is anecdotal because it's not like I researched it, but the potential is there for this to become actually not just supporting biodiversity in the valley, supporting nature, but actually helping farmers reduce how many pesticides they have to use on their farm, how much labor they have to do with orchard sanitation and management during the winter. So, we're also doing cover crops in the orchard, which is great for beneficial insects, pollinators, reduces pesticides, reduces herbicides. Those are some of the major benefits there, but also the soil benefits. We're talking a lot about soil today. There's increased water infiltration, better diversity in microbial communities, greater nutrient cycling, availability of the nutrients that are there. So it doesn't come without its challenges, I would say, because for every great practice that you do in the orchard, there are some trade-offs that make my life maybe a little more difficult, because if you have great cover crops, you also have a lot of gophers, and which kind of mess up your orchard floor and can make harvest a little more difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, because it's not, but it does force you to actually do a lot more problem solving and get a little creative and be willing to go outside of the normal farming box, maybe use some different tools. So that's the cover crop there. It looks like a hot mess, but it's it's actually amazingly manageable if you get creative and try something new. Another thing I want to talk about, and this relates to what Julie's doing, is on-farm groundwater recharge, and that's something that we do during the winter if the water is, the hydrology is there for it. Like if we have atmospheric rivers coming through and we're going to have big events, we're able to, in some of our water districts, open up those gates and flood our orchards. The Almond Board of California did research that showed that it did not harm our crops, and in fact, there were a lot of benefits to it. We're able to leach salts that accumulate during the drought years and get those below the root zone. It's also a great opportunity to get rid of some of those gophers if you have some good dogs. But it can be complicated because moving water around in this state, there's a lot of red tape, and it's not always easy to just go out there just because the water is flowing by, to go out there and be able to open that gate and put it out on your property. But all the benefits, it's benefiting communities downstream because I'm taking water out of the system that isn't going to be flooding their community and overwhelming the river system. I'm also keeping it from going to the ocean, and I'm supporting my own community, even my own neighbors. I had a neighbor whose well went dry during the last drought, supporting them by putting more water in the ground than I've actually taken out in a year. And so finally, this is whole orchard recycling. And this is a practice that's really taken off in almond farming and other tree farming, and even in maybe grapes too. I don't know. Anyways, you take a whole orchard at the end of its life, around 25 years. I mean, at this orchard here, I think was like over 25 years old. And you grind it all up, and then you spread the chips out, and then you work it into the soil. Yes, it is soil disturbance, but this is a major soil disturbance that you're only doing like once every 25 years. It's also a huge opportunity to do once every 25 years because the amount of carbon you are adding to the soil, the organic matter, how much you are sequestering, is phenomenal. Like, you could never bring that much compost in a truck. I mean, the cost analysis would just be awful. But, but whole orchard recycling, again, hugely expensive for growers. And it creates some challenges with the woody debris and just all the work that is involved in doing it and coordinating it. But you're looking at a 30% increase in water holding capacity. And then in some of our sandy soils, like, to be able to add that much organic matter makes a huge difference going into the next generation, of your orchard, your family too. And being able to have soils that are far more resilient, that actually can withstand those dry periods during the drought than when maybe you don't have enough water. So huge opportunity there. But not the easiest thing to do. And I have to say, very, very happy that we have had support from the USDA and CDFA on supporting farmers trying to do these projects. And the alternative, if you didn't know, the alternative was burning. So this is, by leaps and bounds, a huge solution and doing so many things to benefit our farmlands. And then my last picture here, this is going back to the cover crop. You can't imagine what a difference it makes when you put, like, you're flooding your orchard and you have that on the ground, and as opposed to having nothing. The water just goes down like that. And so that just tells you how much of a difference you're making in the soil and how it works. Again, lots of challenges, some difficulties, but nothing that we can't get past.
Thank you so much. That's very inspirational to think about the ways everyone can work together. So Hayden will talk to us now about his experiences in the field as well. Thank you so much for being here. And I outed myself by saying Camarillo instead of Camarillo. Apologies.
Okay, I think this is working, right? Yeah, okay. First, I just want to start by saying that it's an amazing opportunity to be here, just to represent kind of a younger generation. I think I've worked with a lot of people who have told me that they don't even believe in climate change. They don't believe that it's a real thing. They don't believe it's happening. And it's pretty difficult to compel them to believe, which is why I'm very excited that it's science-based and fact-focused, because you can't really deny things like that. You can't deny a fact. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any photos of the lands that I worked, and I also don't have a soil joke, which I was really wishing I had, but I don't have one. That was a soil joke? That counts? All right, cool. Yeah, the work. So actually, one of the biggest projects that I worked on in the Seas was reforestation efforts after the Paradise Fire in Paradise, California. Well, it's the Camp Fire, but it was in Paradise. A lot of people call it Paradise Fire. I call it that because that's just how I remember it. But so we planted roughly 1,900 trees just next to Little Butte Creek, which is in the city of Paradise. We planted native tree species. So we planted live oak. We planted, I think it's black oak, and then one more that I can't remember the name of. But I think it's important to recognize the specific species of tree, because in previous to that fire, the ratio of pine to oak in that area was about 80 to 20. So 80% pine and 20% oak. And pine is much more susceptible to fire. And I think that's a big reason why the campfire burned as badly as it did. So being able to come in and plant a native species that's more fire resilient and is more accommodated to the soil in the area, which is something that I am glad that I can say. That was where I was leading with the soil, but yeah, it's sandy, it's grainy, it's rough, and it's difficult to plant anything there that isn't native. So to be able to work there, it was great because I have a lot of friends and family who lived there and lost their homes. But that kind of leads into just reforestation in general. I think it's very important that we do fuel reduction, and I've worked on fuel reduction projects in Camarillo, I've worked in fuel reduction projects in Chico, but something that I think is more prevalent and something that I would like to work on more is focusing on recovery rather than just dealing with the problem and fighting fire. I think fighting fire is very important, but you mentioned how time is constantly against us, and recovery, fast-acting recovery is one of the most important things. So being able to come in after a fire has, ripped through a town and being able to restore it quickly is very important. I'm trying to think about like other projects that I've worked on that have been impactful in that way. I'm drawing a blank here. Sorry, guys. Yeah, would you mind coming back to me? Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Hayden. No worries. We'll come back to you on Q&A. But let's give Hayden a round of applause too. And I did notice in your bio that you're actually training incoming Corps members too, which is great because you're actually inspiring a lot of other young people to be on the ground. And as we all know, we need the personnel to do this work. And California has done an amazing job of funding programs to bring personnel into the system. And it's up to all of us to continue to inspire them to stay with it and advocate for these funds and for these actions as we go forward. So thank you. Okay, Bruce, we're moving over to you now, and please jump in and tell us about these beautiful landscapes.
Sure, thank you. I want to thank everybody for inviting us up here. We have a lot to share as well. And for the soil people in the room, one thing I'd like to share is in our Ipai language, the term for soil, land, is mat, M-A-A-T. But we also refer to our soul as that. And in that way, the soul can never be removed from the soil. And so that's why ancestral territory is such a integral part of who we are and what we do and how we identify as a tribe and as a people. So I just wanted to set that aside, and I really appreciated the conversations this morning. Ipai Nation, we are in San Diego County. We're at the Pacific Crest. We're way up high in the mountains. Our village is at about 3,000 feet elevation, which is near the town of Santa Isabel, Julian area. But our elevations go up to a mile high on the crest. The Pacific Crest Trail is just about 5 miles east of our new Nature-Based Solutions grant area. As you can see, our people have a good history of conservation. I think everybody in the room probably knows that San Diego County is one of the most biologically diverse counties in the lower 48. It didn't get there by chance. It was by people, tribes like us, who learned to live with the land and learned to live within its means that it can provide. So, this is not our first dance to the conservation hoedown, if you will. You know, we have a history of setting aside, even we have 15,000 acres of sovereign territory. We are so gifted that our grandmothers and our grandfathers fought for us to have that piece of land and to be able to identify with it and to care for it. It's not La Jolla, but, you know, it's up there in the mountains and we love it, okay? So what I'm trying to say, though, is there is so much of our territory that has been conserved through the generations, and it's by tradition. It's by generation after generation saying, no, you're not going to build your house in that valley. No, we need to protect that watershed. No, this is an ancient acorn grove, and no one's going to take this over privately because it was a communal benefit. So we have that in our tradition. What we don't have is a lot of institutional structure to be able to manage that. And so as our nature-based solutions grant came to be, no one more than me felt like the dog that caught the car, okay? It's just like, now what? Oh my God, we have this tremendous opportunity, and we've really got to get these guiding documents together, this governance structure, all of that what I call institutional infrastructure, which tribal governments are really limited in what they can do. You know, and a tribe like ours, you know, we don't have a casino, we don't have that model of economic development that can really fund all of those great social and cultural and economic things that you see other tribes doing. So we have to do it a little bit differently. And so as part of our project, I wanted to be very clear that, you know, as I said in the beginning, we can't remove the people from the land. And so our project is called the Equina Tribal, Ecological, and Cultural Preserve. And every single word of that title is important. It's not only an ecological preserve, it's a cultural preserve. And it's not a cultural preserve to some past forgotten society like the Anasazi, which is a wonderful thing to do, and a wonderful thing to study, and a wonderful thing to set aside. But our philosophy is the culture is part of the land. You can't remove the people from it. Tuolumne Meadows wasn't always a meadow, folks, okay? And so the idea here is we want to make sure that our culture is part of the overall, there's a place for the culture in this preserve. And so, you know, we're really trying to leverage that, if you will. So the idea here is, hey, we're at this beautiful territory that's right between this wonderful transition zone between the high desert and the high mountains, okay, in San Diego County. We're between Borrega Springs and Julian and the Cuyamaca Mountains, and it's just a wonderful little niche to be in that people don't often think of San Diego County in terms of high desert communities. And so not just that, and the fact that we're sort of re-indigenizing this 1,100 acres that was a former horse ranch, equestrian sort of, I think the guy raised racehorses at one time back in the 70s and 80s. You know, those families that cared for those 1,100 acres in the interim between the tribe losing the territory, and we literally lost the territory by being chased out of that valley with guns, to now reconquering that territory and re-indigenizing that land, if you will. At the same time, we want to value and honor the fact that these families cared for this land in the interim 150, 200 years. And so when we say cultural preserve, I didn't also mention this land is right on the Butterfield Overland Trail. And that trail is in the current stages of being designated as a National Historic Trail by the National Park Service. A lot of history. I mean, that was the country's first interstate into Southern California, right? I mean, the American country, if you will. And so, you know, there's a lot of history to this land of not just our culture having occupied it for thousands and thousands of years, but also all these other cultures coming through. And so what we hope to do is elevate that and talk about that story and talk about the Butterfield Trail from our perspective and what it did, representing that eastward invasion from the Americans after the Civil War. You know, San Diego tribes, they always say, oh, the Spaniards came in to the port, right? And that's how the story started. Well, yeah, it's how it started, but there were other invasions, and Butterfield was one of them. And so, you know, we want to talk about that history as part of this project. The last thing I'll say is, you know, challenges, opportunities, all of that kind of stuff. It's mostly getting these, you know, we're in full-on implementation phase. We're trying to complete our grant project, but getting the things up in the first year was really, really difficult. Just trying to get all of these RFPs in line and getting all these documents going and all of that kind of stuff. I would just say that, you know, you really just have to pluck away at each thing and really just know that it's not going to get built in a day or the 3 years that the grant is going to allow us, but we're going to get that great jump start on all of this. And hopefully in 5 and 10 years, we might have a new cultural center there, an exhibition hall. We might develop a small eco resort or glamping type resort to host people. And finally, I just want to say that, you know, tribes use their economic development in certain ways, whether it's a casino and a resort, whether it's the Chimawave and the Colorado River, they use their resources as they have them. We want to do the same thing and create this platform for the tribe to sort of be able to host people, be able to learn about who we are and what we do in this little corner of the world that we have, and also enjoy a little nature and wildlife that might be there as well.
I'm wondering if we could actually pull a slide up for one of those landscapes just to have behind us, because I think our work is really about these images and the places where we're working. Thank you, that's beautiful. You know, thank you so much to all four of you for bringing nature to us here in Sacramento to have this conversation. And, you know, you're doing the work out in the field where we all need to get out more and see the work that you're doing. You know what you're doing. You know what works. You know the downstream benefits. And I think it's up to a lot of us in the room who can count those benefits and tell the story forward to make sure that it's easier for you to get that funding and it's easier for you to have the institutional frameworks to just keep moving on the work that you know how to do. And we have so many solutions already, and I think we just need this pace and scale and a focus on what we're doing. So these narratives and the storytelling is all really, really important. And if there are communicators out here, getting this work out into the world more is critical for success in this world of nature-based solutions, and critical for bridging that gap where people think nature and the economy are separated. They are intertwined, and they've always been intertwined. So thank you so much to all four of you. I've got some follow-up questions that I shared with you ahead of time, and I also want the audience to start prepping a couple of questions, and we'll keep you on your toes with some that are not prepped. So just thinking about that pace and scale, who are the types of partners that you currently work with or that you could imagine working with who would help you get to a bigger scale beyond where you already are, and move faster than you're already able to do? Who's missing at the table who would be helpful, or who's out there who you want to bring to the table to get these projects going faster and bigger?
Well, we already have government at the table, but I would like to stress that we don't want to lose that. So having that consistency would be very important, especially as you have growers, especially smaller growers, that wouldn't even be doing any of these practices if they didn't originally get the funding for them. And you have to understand how things grow over time, like literally. So I'm doing practices on my property, but then my neighbors see what I'm doing and they're like, oh, what's that? And then they go and get funding and then somebody sees that. So it just doesn't happen overnight. People I'd like to get on board, actually, honestly, I'd like to get corporate America on board with actually supporting this, because as a farmer, they benefit so much from what we do, because, I mean, they're the price makers, we're the price takers. You hear that all the time. But they are a part of this whole equation. So.
Yes, totally. Working on that too. The I thought about your question more from the perspective of like characteristics of great partnership, and my goodness, some of the strongest and most productive partnerships we've been developing in accelerating how we can deliver floodplain restoration projects have been the ones that are just super like human. You know, when you meet somebody for the first time, and it's not like with a slide deck and at a board table with your tie on, but it's like we're walking around with boots on the ground talking about our kids, and then also about how are we going to advance this thing together, and holding each other accountable, calling all the time, and really like just getting into it and working together. This is one of the challenges with working with, you know, Sacramento, is like, wow, it's a big ordeal to bring a whole bunch of people from Sacramento down to the ground to visit and see, and to really at River Partners, we call it truck time, like spend time driving around, just talking when you're in the truck. It's hard to find truck time with y'all, you know? And so developing like those relationships that are going to let us trust each other enough to move faster, to move bigger, to take bigger risks, because we have the data that supports that those risks are going to lead to even bigger rewards, is really challenging. I'll also just say that the corporates are starting to come to the table. We're starting to learn, but my gosh, the scaling is slow, right? So like, how do we get through the inertia there? And then I've been incredibly inspired by community members in various places where we have these floodplain restoration projects, from Bakersfield, you know, to outside of Lemoore, right? Those communities out there, like Allensworth, the folks in Modesto, you know, all the way up the valley, all the way up to Redding. There are small communities that are at risk of flooding, that have groundwater challenges, that once we get into partnership, they teach us so much. They teach us so much about what nature-based solutions mean to humans, not to the water system or to the balance of carbon in the soil, but to psychological health, you know, to community health, to physical health. And it paints this picture and inspires us every day to mire through the bureaucracy of trying to get the corporates to come in more, or trying to get more truck time with the Sacramento people. Mire through all of that, because my God, that future that we understand through those eyes is so beautiful. Like, that's the future we want to get to.
This is all new for me. My day job is, you know, I'm a city planner with LA County, and for the folks from Altadena, obviously Altadena was an unincorporated community, so we've had quite a year in our agency. But I also want to say that I think that's where my experience kind of came in on this project. I understood what conservation was and what we could do from an economic standpoint under that to make the land at least help us pay for the maintenance and the upkeep, and providing that infrastructure for public uses and so forth. But, you know, for me, what I had to learn as a councilman, because that was a fairly new job. I've been a city planner for 30 years. Councilman, that's only about 4 years now. But what I learned is to, number one, lean on the talent that we do have. The folks in our environmental department, top notch. And they are, because they love the land they're working on, and they just feel really invested in it. So that's one, learn to find the talent within the organization. Our grants manager, oh my God, she was probably, you know, a pivotal part of just putting this whole grant together, but also in the implementation phase as well. So again, that talent of who's in your own organization, figure that out. In terms of external partners, though, I'm learning, and that's part of my experience. So what I am learning is talk about your projects, whatever chance you get, because you never know who you're going to run into. And so that's why I gladly accepted the invitation today, because I just love seeing all of your faces, but learning what you do as well, and learning from you. I learned some wonderful concepts this morning from Dr. Lubchenko. But anyways, what I would say is, you know, I talk to my biologist at county planning, and while he can't necessarily help me directly, he gives me wonderful sort of resources to go to and get to. I'll talk to, I have a home in Borrego Springs, which is just about a 30-minute drive from the San Isabel Reservation. It's down in the desert. And, the whole town is surrounded by the largest state park in the country, I think, the lower 48. And by the way, wildflowers are bursting this year. If you guys get down to the Borrego Valley, it's just beautiful this year. I don't know if it's super bloom, but it's beautiful. But anyways, a lot of expertise there with the park as well as the Anza Borrego Foundation. And in my sort of own activism and concern for the Desert State Park and the desert ecosystems, I've met people through those organizations. They've really helped me in terms of resources and consultants or people that can help us. And then finally, I would say, I'm still sort of learning again, but I got a random call Saturday from a former neighbor from Los Angeles 10 years ago, okay? And I hadn't talked to her for a while. She moved over to the west side. I moved over there, and then I moved into San Diego County, but I hadn't talked to her for a while. We just started talking. And when I was telling her what I was up to, she's just like, Bruce, I'm getting chills on what you're talking about. And she's like, my career's in transition right now because she's in, equity, diversity, that kind of stuff. And those consultants are really, their contracts are just ashes right now. But anyway, she's kind of going through this own career, but she has a tremendous background in marketing communication. She's like, I would love to do your marketing communications plan for this facility. And it's that type of sort of just tapping into the network that you have, even if it's limited, to see who might lead you in a direction. And so, I'm so glad I picked up the call from that former neighbor because now she's coming over next weekend and we're going to have an overnight. And, this used to be a wine mom in the old neighborhood in LA, you know what I mean? And now the wine mom's helping me with a marketing communication plan, you know what I mean? So you just never know where those connections can kind of lead, even from 10 and 15 years ago.
Yeah, I wouldn't really consider this a partnership with, it's not like a federal agency, but I think one of the biggest, or one of the most inspiring things for me is getting people involved. And that's on like a community level, getting younger people involved, people like myself. Truth be told, I had never heard of nature-based solutions. Well, I'd never heard of the term nature-based solutions. I know what it is, but I had never heard someone say it before coming here. And I think that's really inspiring because I know that when I leave from here, I'll have learned and I'll be able to share that with people my age and getting them involved in things like this. I grew up watching David Attenborough, and I've talked to so many people who don't even know who he is, and that's a shock. That's a shock to me, right? Right? How do you not know that name, right? He's got like the most beautiful voice on the planet, and he's just like this gentle old soul, But I think the greatest partnership for us is the younger generation, because those are going to be who lead us into a brighter future, and I think that's the biggest thing. That's just my quick response.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. You all are really inspiring, so thank you. And I'm kind of envisioning like a Mario Kart through nature with David Attenborough's voice narrating it. Could we do that? Yeah, done. Then we get young people in. So, we spent enough time on one question, which was great. I wanted to ask you more nuts and bolts, but we can do that over lunch. And I'd love to get a few questions from the audience. And as we're seeing hands raised, I'll just take some moderator license and say, one of the groups I work with, we've actually maintained one of our IRA grants, knock on wood. And we're actually working on a new method to measure, monitor, and report all these ecosystem services and community benefits that come from these projects. And it should be out in publication in the next 6 weeks or so, and I'd love to talk to any one of you about operationalizing it to report the benefits of your projects and putting them into really glossy outputs. So any questions in the audience? Anyone? Really? No questions? If not, I'll throw in one more. Okay, good. There we go.
Thank you, Jonathan Long with the Reed Climate Center. We do workforce development training into nature-based solutions. We try to center nature as infrastructure. And as we dive deeper into what are those practices and principles, sometimes they're obvious: ecosystem and nature-based solutions, urban forestry, urban farming. Sometimes they're super nerdy and technical, like fungi-based bioremediation, that kind of stuff. But when we dive into the origin of these practices, we find sometimes they're business practices for organizations we bring on campus and help turn that into an accredited curriculum. But almost always they're ancient indigenous practices or biomimicry-based practices. And so some of the times we think about, like, what is the origination of value in the context of biodiversity or carbon? And often that starts in community, and often it starts in ancient practices. And so I want to ask, how do you think about scaling these things as we think about building innovation and tech transfer as an export for California as we bring our climate solutions to the world, but still honoring the origin of those ancient indigenous practices in the curriculums we create? So there's not a specific question in there, but I'd like any of you to ponder that and say, how do you think about that in the work that you do to make it inclusive, but also scalable in our modern economic context?
And I'll just say we have 5 minutes left, so maybe 30 seconds from each of you on any thoughts on modernizing and evolving practices.
I'll just say that, especially here in California, you can't disconnect indigenous practices from all of our nature-based solutions. And sadly, we don't have enough, storytellers, sharers, information, or enough trust built already to share all of that knowledge as quickly as we ought to or need to. So it's a big challenge. You're right to raise it. How do we do it?
Big challenge to discuss over lunch. One more question out there? I did see hands before. Okay, well, I'm going to leave us then. I'm going to ask you for each of you to just send us off to lunch with one topic to think about in our discussions, and just a quick popcorn, one topic that we can think about over lunch. And before we do that, I want to say thank you to Trust for Public Land for funding lunch. It's rare to go to a public meeting where we get lunch, so thank you. And thank you to all of our speakers. You all were really helpful and inspirational. Thank you for the day and for being here, and we'll send you off with a few messages to think about while you eat.
Well, my message comes from the last 15 years of using and learning nature-based solutions, and I've become very philosophical about it. And I do have a background in conservation and fisheries biology, actually. And what I have come to understand is that there are the laws of nature, and in agriculture, for so many decades, we have been working against the laws of nature. And like anywhere, if you break the laws, you're going to end up in trouble at some point. So I have been learning through nature-based solutions that I need to work within the laws or with the laws. And I have consistently found that the outcomes are better. So stop working against nature, start working with it.
Yeah, I touched on this when I was speaking, but I would ask you to ask, how can people be part of the solution and included in your projects? Because the ecology includes people, risks and opportunities with that. And so how do you control that? How do you leverage that in terms of talent, future generations, and custodianship, stewardship, all of that kind of stuff, but also, okay, what kind of threats might they bring, and how can we counterbalance that or anticipate that? And so I would just say it's, ecology and people, sometimes people think of them as two different things, but the EPI don't.
California's got a huge economy, right? We heard Secretary Crowfoot talk about it. We also have in nature-based solutions, or in all of our climate solutions area, we have these cap and trade auction funds, right? The greenhouse gas reduction fund. But we haven't actually created an allocation of those funds to the type of solutions we all just talked about today. So discuss why haven't we gotten there yet, but also I'm really excited that River Partners and Audubon and a coalition of folks are working on trying to advance some kind of bill this year to get a specific allocation of those GGRF cap and trade funds for nature-based solutions.
I couldn't even think of anything, but I'll say this. It was brought up in the last discussion, and I thought it was really interesting. There was a comment made about someone talking about how they invest in nature and they invest in trees. They don't invest in, or they invest in trees, they don't invest in nature, right? And I thought, like, it is. Honestly, I was like, but I can kind of see from like a logistical standpoint, you know, you invest in the product, you invest in, you know, you invest in wood, you invest in homes, and you invest in land, but you don't invest in the, I guess, the environment that you are impacting by investing in those products. So taking land, taking those trees from that area, and building homes in that space is taking away from the importance of the land that you had just now impacted, and I think that that's something that we should think more about.
Thanks again. Back to you, Amanda.
All right, thank you all so much. Really, a round of applause again, please. Thank you for your work. Thank you. Everyone, please go grab a bite to eat. Please do get back here by 1 o'clock. If you thought the morning was jammed, just wait till the afternoon. We're going to get kicked off by the chair of the Air Resources Board, so please be on time. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you, thank you. I hope everyone enjoyed lunch. I had a vegan sandwich. It was delicious. And a big thanks to TPL again. But this time my stomach is full, so I'm really thankful. We're kicking off the afternoon, and I would just say, to the extent that folks are standing, obviously stand if you want to stand, but there are seats, so please sit down and relax. So we've got a pretty packed afternoon. I'm just going to quickly run through the agenda before I bring on our next speaker. We're going to have a couple of different sessions here in the room, and we'll break right at 2 o'clock and head upstairs for these small group solution discussions, which we're really excited. We've got a lot of folks prepared to facilitate those conversations, to take notes, and bring some of the specific solutions that are identified and areas of focus that are discussed back to the plenary, where we'll hear from each of the facilitators in a little quick lightning round description of what was heard. So just ask that when it's time to head upstairs, that you please do head upstairs, because we'd like to get at least a solid hour in those discussions so folks have time. And then we'll have a dialogue of state agency leaders who are going to talk a lot about the work that they do and how folks can engage and where they see nature-based solutions headed in California. And we'll wrap up with some remarks from the Deputy Cabinet Secretary and Senior Advisor on Climate for Governor Newsom, Sarah Swig. And I will just tease and preview that there might be another little guest speaker in the afternoon. And then we'll be done for the day. So without further ado, we'll kick off the afternoon. I'm so proud to bring to the stage Chair Lauren Sanchez. She's the chair of the California Air Resources Board and has an incredible background and history on the nexus between climate and economy and nature. So really excited to hear from her. Our timing is tight, and so we're just going to do some quick remarks and then transition right into the fireside chat with Karen and Wendy. So Lauren, if you wouldn't mind joining us here, thank you so much. Everyone, please give her a round of applause.
Thank you. Hello, hello. Good afternoon. Thank you all for having me here today as chair of the California Air Resources Board, but also as a passionate enthusiast for our natural world. These treasured places in California have made me who I am and inspired a career in helping to protect nature and our communities. Like many of you, I have countless memories up and down this state of hiking through a redwood forest with my now 1-year-old son, or jumping in an alpine lake with my pup. It's a privilege to be here this afternoon at this important event, especially as we close in the 20 years since the adoption of AB 32, which started California's journey to addressing climate pollution. California has long led the nation, and in some respects the world, in tackling climate change with urgency, innovation, and enduring commitment. Through our leadership, we have shown that ambitious climate policy can improve public health, grow our economy, and protect our most vulnerable communities. But as climate impacts intensify, from catastrophic wildfires, as we saw last year, and prolonged droughts to extreme heat and flooding, it is increasingly clear that emissions reductions from the power, transportation, and industrial sectors, while absolutely essential, are not sufficient. We must also strengthen the natural systems that sustain our communities and our economies by building resilience. That's why today I want to talk about the importance of nature-based solutions and why they must remain a central pillar of our climate work at CARB. CARB's most recent scoping plan rightly recognizes that achieving carbon neutrality by 2045 is only possible by scaling up natural and working lands climate solutions. These lands are not a side strategy, they are foundational. This means our goal is not to maximize carbon storage in natural and working lands, but to restore them to a more resilient state, which in turn supports sustainable carbon sequestration. Finding this balance is a complex problem. Lands must help us mitigate climate change while also providing water, reducing fire risk, supporting wildlife habitat, offering recreational activities, and improving access for all. Meeting these multiple needs requires large-scale strategic science-based thinking, tools, and programs. That's why California is leading the way in accelerating these nature-based solutions. Over its long history, CARB has successfully deployed numerous nature-based solution strategies that have reduced climate impacts and air pollution. I want to give a few examples of that work. We've partnered recently with air districts to safely deploy prescribed fire, the most scalable, cost-effective fuel reduction tool we have. Through Cap and Invest, we've generated and deployed critical funding for healthy forests and healthy soils across California. We're spearheading foundational research on public health benefits from nature-based solutions and documenting the very real costs of inaction. Our compliance offset programs have directed billions of dollars into forest conservation and management, unlocking private investment at scale. And in 2022, we became the first jurisdiction in the world to fully integrate natural and working lands into our statewide climate strategy, our scoping plan. CARB also continues to lead the way in nature-based planning and monitoring. We are partnering with our colleagues at Natural Resources and NASA on the Wildfire Ecosystem Resilience and Risk Initiative to develop the remote sensing technology that protects Californian communities. And we're building California's first Redwoods Forest Observatory, with natural resources, UC Davis, and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, so we can track how these irreplaceable ecosystems respond to climate change and better protect them for our future. The result of this collaboration and investment in science and data means that we can understand our ecosystems at levels not previously possible. And that is what today demands. At CARB, we're leveraging these tools and data sources to update California's natural and working lands inventory. This inventory tracks all of the carbon in vegetation and soils across the state every year. We plan to release the latest inventory next month, and because of the tools that I've mentioned, it will be the most robust and holistic inventory ever produced for any state, and represents a massive leap forward in our ability to quantify in the science and policy of carbon accounting in our lands. For the first time, we're not just providing state-level data, but we will be arming local jurisdictions like counties and air districts with data so that that can inform their own decision-making. The results of this new inventory, as a preview, are both good news and a cautionary tale for California. The good news is that the inventory shows that our lands are capable of storing significant amounts of carbon and will be a critical step towards reaching carbon neutrality. On the other hand, the inventory is just one more data point that shows the devastating effect that climate change is already having on our ecosystems. In the last decade, we have seen some of the most catastrophic wildfires in the state's history, resulting in massive carbon losses and additional pollution. These changes are reflected in our upcoming release. I hope these results spur a renewed commitment to advancing nature-based climate solutions that both meet our goals for climate and strengthen the state's overall resilience. As we continue our efforts to achieve carbon neutrality and clean the air, CARB will continue championing science-based efforts to cut pollution. We'll leverage proven programs like Cap and Invest and Prescribed Fire, while also pursuing new frontiers, for example, carbon removal. And we'll keep expanding the partnerships that allow us to advance nature-based solutions here in California and share strategies that are working with states and nations and tribal communities around the world. The work ahead is urgent, but also ahead full of opportunity. Today's summit is proof of what we can accomplish together, pooling our knowledge, our resources, and our commitment to action. The ecosystems we protect today, the forests we protect, the carbon we store, these aren't just climate strategies. They're investments in thriving communities and wild places that will sustain generations of Californians to come. Together, we're not just responding to climate change, we're building the resilient, healthy California that our future demands. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Chair Sanchez, and really appreciate your time this afternoon. Looking forward to welcoming Secretary Ross, who has just entered the building. We're going to transition over now into a fireside chat on the incredible role that agriculture has to play in addressing climate change. We're so blessed to have Secretary Ross on our team with her depth of experience and the leadership that she's shown on nature-based solutions in California. So we're very grateful to you for being here, Secretary Ross, and we're also very appreciative of Wendy Millett, who is going to be joining us. She's from Tomcat Ranch, and we're going to enjoy a fireside chat on the role of agriculture in scaling nature-based solutions. Come on up. Thank you.
Is it on? Yep, got the answer to that one. These are really powerful, aren't they? Wendy, thanks for joining me. I'm going to make a few opening comments, but first I'm going to catch my breath because literally I just walked in the door. It's one of those days. Okay, so First of all, I want to thank our partners at CNRA for having this great idea of a summit on nature-based solutions. And hopefully everyone who's here has gained a lot and broadened their perspective. And we're all ready to go home because we've all got exactly the same understanding of what are nature-based solutions. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about those. For us in agriculture, there are many practices that we've used historically, but maybe we've gotten away from. And when we talk about nature-based solutions, some of the things that we're talking about is like back to the future. But it comes from that connectedness on the land and being able to use conservation practices that some people characterize as working in harmony with Mother Nature. And some of them are newer to our understanding of one of the reports I like to bring up in every conversation around nature-based solutions and climate solutions is our very world-famous below-ground biodiversity report that the Department of Food and Agriculture published a few years ago. That with new science and new technologies, it has enhanced our understanding of that valuable below-ground biodiversity, that ecosystem of all of these elements that are talking to one another, and how do we accelerate those activities? And nature-based solutions is a big part of that. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Wendy with her extensive experience and in a variety of positions that you've had. And a confession here, I have worked with her spouse, Rob, for many years now on ag tech stuff. So I just think it's so much fun to have this opportunity to visit with you. So we're going to jump right into it. Wendy is now the ranch director for Tomcat Ranch. And I am one of the few people that's probably been invited numerous times and I've never been able to get there. But sometime in 2026, and I don't know if Virginia, our deputy secretary, is in the audience, but Virginia, you're going to take me. I'm just telling you right now, and it's going to be a fabulous trip, and we might have to stay overnight. Okay. Now, for me, a fireside chat would include a glass of California-grown wine. Wine industry's suffering right now, people. I got to do my part. But your background, before you went to Tomcat, where you've been for 13 years, was an academic as well as working with environmental organizations. And I really admire the work that you've done because in addition to your full-time job, you've served on a number of boards for a variety of land trusts and other conservation organizations. So I'm going to turn this over to you and say, Wendy, tell us about yourself and how did you get into being on a working ranch?
Wonderful. I'm happy to be here and super happy to chat with you. Rob sends his regards. My life's kind of been a back and forth weave between ranching and conservation over a long time, starting when I grew up. And I actually fell in love with ranching because I was a horse kid. So I've been doing ranching. And actually, this is a sort of a short line to how I ended up Tomcat Ranch. I was ranching in Wyoming back in the 90s because I was a horse kid and saw a conventional operation turn into a sort of holistic adaptive management operation and wrote a business plan for a ranch school. And literally it was called the Ranch School. Pretty clever, eh? And many years later, well, so then my mentor, who at that point was my boss at the ranch, had been former head of Fish and Wildlife Service in DC. And I said, John, I want to save ranches. And he said, well, you need to go work at the Jackson Hole Land Trust. I was in Wyoming at that time. So it kind of has been back and forth from ranching to conservation to ranching. And I ended up at Tomcat Ranch because it's a ranch education school, you know, sort of matched with my ranch education, but because it was a place that we could practice ranching and conservation together. Okay. And Tom and Kat, the owners, thus the name, had made it a priority that we would have a ranch that would help prove out the case of conservation and how grazing animals could be beneficial for the ecosystems, a theory that made sense because grazing animals have been across the planet on large landscapes for eternity. And so wouldn't it make sense that we could mimic that in a, in a working landscape context?
How fun. So a little over half of all of the landscape in California is held by private landowners. So it's very important that we think about them as partners and doing this journey. And we also, at this very challenging time for agriculture, which we're already living the disruptions of climate change and extreme weather events, but also huge economic turmoil. It's probably the worst ag economy I've seen in 30 years. And at the same time, as a state, we continue to pursue really strong, bold, achievable goals for climate. And having nature-based solutions and natural working lands as a part of the scoping plan is so hugely important. But now the targets and the deadline for the targets are getting closer and closer. And for all of this, in addition to everything we're doing on 30 by 30, conserving, which seems like a no-brainer, acres for cropland, 12,000 acres a year, and for rangeland, 33,000 acres a year. And that's important because I was just talking with a group in the governor's office that so many of our families, especially in ranching, are like 5th and 6th generation. So this is generational change, but with this permanency to it. So I'd love to hear you talk about some of the specifics of nature-based solutions that are being implemented and that we would love to see scaled up as we build out these targets to achieve the conservation of rangeland.
Yeah, happy to. And maybe just to say, you know, one of the things at Tomcat we've been doing for 14 years is had science there. So Point Blue Conservation Science, they're here in the room. They've been our scientists, started baseline monitoring. And really the idea has been that every time we did a trial or a practice to try to figure out what's innovative in rangelands, because we could afford to, and most 4th, 5th generation folks can't afford that risk to try something different, or maybe are just reluctant to because, you know, traditions get passed on and they're hard to do what your grandpa told you not to do. We've been doing those trials and practices. And so I think the thing that I see, feel, and excited about for ranching, not just here, but around the world, and I get to go hang out with sort of the adventurous, you know, rule-breaking ranchers around the world. And so there's a lot of practices and management and science, and, you know, we talked about soil this morning a bunch, that is now new understanding that can be brought into ranching, and so that with a little help, you know, on the funding side for ranchers and farmers to make that transition, they see that it's time to make some changes. And the Next Gen's really pushing hard, a lot of cases, to make those changes. We host a workshop every year for Next Gen ranch inheritors, and we basically talk about the challenge of how did they do something different when, you know, the habit's a certain way. So I think there's lots of opportunities to take those practices. I was talking to Albert Strauss at lunch, and, you know, a lot of us innovative ranchers and farmers are doing those practices on the ground. You heard from Christina earlier, and I think you all could be doing that and could be looking at what we're doing, you know, in the same way that we're all trying to learn from each other, because politically, I think farmers and ranchers are perceived to be sitting on the other side of the political aisle from conservation, environmental. We then don't learn as much from each other as I think we need to.
Well, since you brought up the topic, sometimes there is a gap in communication. I don't know about y'all, but I've witnessed it. I've been part of it sometimes. But I would love to hear your experience. How do we close that gap? And how, sometimes it's intimidating. Will they want to say hi back or whatever it might be? Give me a couple of examples of how you've helped people close that gap and go, wow, we have a lot in common here.
Well, for once, I think fundamentally humans, like, we're not so good if it's different. So let's just own that it's okay to actually reach out. And usually if you're nice to somebody, it goes a long way, right? When I started at Tomcat, the ranchers sat at one end of the staff table and the conservation scientists sat at the other. You all have experienced this before in your work. And it took some work to figure out what was on the ground. But I think especially for agriculture people, you know, our business first and foremost, and we do a grass-fed beef business called Left Coast Grass Fed, first and foremost, our priority is about paying our bills. And so it's nice for everybody to come from outside the ranch and say we should do X, Y, and Z. And I'm not telling anybody anything you don't know, but just sort of humanize it, is that having the conversation about what choices they can make, what's in their capacity to do. A lot of ranchers are actually working off ranch now. They can't afford to work full-time on ranch, so they don't have that extra time to spend to make a practice change. But some conversation about how we could work together to make that practice change, what kind of funding they need, and figuring out what the support systems could look like. It's just what we've got to do, and I know we're all trying to do that, and we're all working more with tribes. Like, there's just a lot of people out there who've been really on the ground, land-based work, and the insights that we have from working daily on land is different than what my experience was working in conservation when I'd come to see, a ranch we were trying to buy or do an easement on or whatever. So, a specific example, we're on the coast. Tomcat's 1,800 acres. We're pretty wet, moist compared to a lot of the state. Yeah. But we've been able to change our grazing practices, and we've increased native perennial grasses in all of the pastures on the ranch. And that was a goal that the conservation scientists, Point Blue, set for us. It doesn't mean that we've got every pasture, but I mean, if I say that to the conservation folks who come and visit now, they're happy that we've done that. And I say we did that with our cattle, and we got even better at it when we put our cattle and our goats grazing on that landscape. And I just get blank looks at me, like, but that's not possible. Cattle are bad for the land. And like, well, it's called how you manage. So it's not that the cows and the grazing animals are bad, but how we manage, and we could do better managing. And now I'm being long-winded, so I'll pass it back.
No.
But, there's a lot of
Here's the
specific
expert.
examples that I think are helping to show those success stories and make it exciting, because when we've been able to increase native perennial grasses, that means we're increasing the green growing season. That's grazing capacity for the livestock into later into the summer. So if we can show the growers or the ranchers and farmers that we're increasing value, economic value to them through that practice, that's the co-benefit, that's the nature-based solution, right? Yeah, nature-based solutions are supposed to be additive, and by the way, they're cost-effective. I mean, I keep thinking that listening in the room is you've got a whole force of ranchers out in this state who are eager to get out on landscapes, eager to graze, and they could do a lot of good work for you. We recently got asked to graze down at state parks in our region, which many state parks are like, oh, we don't have grazing on our parks. Well, they did come in because they came over to Tomcat a whole bunch of different times, and we showed them that we've been able to increase a bunch of the native perennial target grasses and target species in the area, and they said, oh, great, you can do that with goats? Like, yeah, goats are our tool. We tell them where to go when we want to. We do electric fence, so.
Yeah, this wasn't in my talking notes, sorry, Amanda. But can you talk specifically if you've done some work on wildfire prevention? I mean, you're hinting at it, but I think it's interesting to think about how we could be even more targeted around some of the issues that seem overwhelming.
Love that you asked it, and I said to somebody that the picture up there about the goats grazing earlier this morning, I was like, for goats for fire is such a cost-effective nature-based solution, right? You can actually pay somebody to do that, or you could give them access to the land and they could run their goat business. And so we have done a 10-year vegetation management plan with CAL FIRE. Shout out to CAL FIRE wherever you are. Thank you so much. And we are doing a lot of trials about grazing with those trials. So if they do a test plot, then we see what grazing is done. Because once you do a fire, then what happens? Next year the brush looks like it's this high because it loves all those nutrients from the fire. So you've got to have some in-between maintenance thing, and it's really expensive to do these prescribed fires. They have to bring in all these forces of helicopters and all the vehicles in there so that they can make sure that we're fire safe during the prescribed fire. Ooh, carbon footprint's pretty intense. Yeah. And so I'd love to just make sure that we get more grazers out there. We'd be supporting rural livelihood. Yeah. And we'd have that in between years to be able to have sustainable. And by the way, we'd get more native perennial grasses, with the right kind of grazers who understand what they're looking for.
Yeah, this is so exciting. Can we go out for a steak and a glass of wine?
Yeah, you gotta come. Left Coast grass fed.
I want to do a shift because of your experience with land trusts. I've worked in my career, I've worked more closely with like American Farmland Trust, the California Rangeland Trust, that's short for California Rangeland Trust, and the California Farmland Trust, so cropping and ranching. And one of the things that's always been remarkable to me is how oversubscribed the Rangeland Trust in particular has been. It was one of the newer land trusts, but these multi-generational families that are willing to lock in that land for many more generations to come. That's just the mentality in agriculture. We don't think about the next quarterly return. We think about next year and 10 years from now and my grandchildren's years from now. How can land trusts be part of, and then I'm going to ask you about RCDs, just to give you a heads up. But land trusts, as they acquire land, that it comes with the pride of protection, but it comes with responsibility. Can they be putting these practices on that land? How do we bridge that gap? I feel like there is a gap with the practices on some of the lands that are held by different entities.
Yeah, I'd say that just a shout out to those land trusts that are actually doing that. We've got quite a lot of land trusts in the state who are doing, whether you call it regenerative grazing or adaptive grazing or holistic grazing or whatever you want to call it, but climate smart practices. So there are some really good examples. A lot of them have come to Tomcat to see what we're doing. Some land trusts have even bought their own herd of cattle. Wow. But why not? Because you've got all these lands that you've got a management challenge for. When I was at the Nature Conservancy, I remember our CEO, which was Steve McCormick at that time, and he said, we can protect all of these lands, but we got to figure out how to manage it. And raising private philanthropy money to manage lands, as we all know, is difficult. So back to my theory of great partner is you've got ranchers out there willing to get out on these lands. And, we graze now at Peninsula Open Space Trust is our local land trust where we are in Pescadero. And, they've got people out grazing on them. They've got some farmers out there now on them. But, as a land trust, you could prescribe what practices you want to see. And if you want to see, I want to see ecological farming, or you want to call it what words you want. There's a lot of buzzwords, but you could ask that. You could ask for an adaptive grazing program. We developed what did we call it? A regenerative lease for a landowner in our Pescadero area where we graze our cattle, and they wanted to do a conservation easement with post. And they said, would you come in and be our advisor to help develop that easement so that it could prescribe forever the kind of grazing that we wanted? And I said, well, you won't want to prescribe anything really forever. Let's have a management plan that's attached to it. So anyway, just logical steps like that. But I would say for land trust, I think the partnerships of these farmers and ranchers and tribes and the people who are on the ground, those are the folks who really understand how these lands and these ecologies are managed and take the daily care to keep the fences fixed, to keep the trespassers managed, all, to report out on predators, like to account for the great increases in bird species that you could have when you've actually been doing good grazing. So many good things if we mobilize that partnership.
Yeah, and I'm going to put a plug in for resource conservation districts. I'm really proud of the investments we've been able to make in climate smart agricultural programs, but we've been very intentional about of the hundreds of millions of dollars that over $45 million has been put into technical assistance, and a lot of that is cooperative extension, community-based organizations, and resource conservation districts. They're a huge, huge asset for us. Have you done a lot of work with RCDs yourself? So you concur with my opinion. Whew. Okay, I kind of figured out what the answer was going to be in advance, but yeah.
No, I mean, just to say, we all know this, I think, in this work, RCDs provide the technical assistance that we need for farmers and ranchers and landowners, urban to rural, on all kinds of environmental practices. And more landowners, especially new to land ownership, know nothing about managing land. And so they don't understand about soil, they don't understand about cover crops or pollinator friendly or erosion and all that kind of stuff. And that's what those RCDs do for us. And They're incredibly critical, and we don't have enough of them, and we don't have enough of them trained in these, progressive new approach practices. We partnered with San Mateo RCD, Point Blue, and did a Regen Ranching 101 training. I just this weekend actually heard somebody say that it was the most impactful training they'd ever been to. Compliment to really everybody who put that together, but my point is these are young folks coming in. There's a lot of young people in their RCD, and they're coming in with science background, agriculture background. They don't see the silos, and they don't want to live the silos, and they don't want to practice the silos. And if we can give them, the training to do the kinds of good eco-ag practices that we want to see on the land, they go out and multiply that by telling so many landowners. It's just a great investment.
It is. One of the things I've always loved about Tomcat is from the beginning, and knowing Cat, I can understand like the focus of measure to make sure we're getting what we want. And we're trying to hold together the network of folks who at one point had a USDA Climate Smart Partnership grant under a previous administration. And we've lost some of the funding for those, but we want to keep that work of sharing how to measure, monitor, and verify. Because on working lands in particular, all biological systems, but on working lands in particular, there's so many variables. And you've already mentioned Point Blue, which I'm a great admirer of. How did you set about, like, how do we turn this into an action? Because we're still at the beginning of this journey, and there's different models and all of that, but we want to be real, and we want to do it faster, and we want it to be cost effective. Other than that, I don't ask for much.
Just all the hard questions. That one's especially hard because, farm data is really hard to come by. It varies incredibly. Context matters, and that's a huge theory that we have in regenerative agriculture, is how your farm looks and my farm looks. They're totally different, so the same practice might need to be applied differently where you are and where I am. So therefore, doing data collection, having apples look like apples so that we can compare and be interoperable, Rob's favorite word about interoperability of data. Woo. That needs to happen, especially for if you're going to do a market. So the carbon markets are a little challenged right now because we don't have a uniform measure on carbon. We've done this. We did this with a university project where they took 600 soil samples at Tomcat, and they sent them out to a bunch of different labs because we had a theory that the labs are going to all report out differently. Oh, they do. Yeah. So there you go. So how's that market in terms of a strong, verifiable market? You make sure you're using the same lab at a minimum. The technology's coming along. That's going to help us a lot. And I think at least coming up with the Rangeland Monitoring Network, where we have a uniform practice. 1,000 Farms Project is something we're part of. That's a nationwide, Dr. Lundgren, uniform practice. We just have to, the regenerative almond program, they're looking at that. I know the vineyards are looking at these uniform. I hope tree crops orchards, I just heard in Oregon, is working on. So I think even within, the many specialty crops, we got to figure out what's that metric we're going to do or series of metrics and make that interoperable.
Okay, let's invite her to be on the committee, okay? There's a committee for everything. So tell me, you now do ranching full-time. What do you wish you'd known at the beginning of that you know now, and your advice for folks getting started in exploring this really awesome opportunity of...
That's a fun question. Yeah. I was lucky because I learned early on about conservation. I was lucky because I learned a long time ago about land trusts. So I kind of knew there were a lot of partners out there who I could work with, and I felt comfortable talking to them. So I guess I would say that I did know that, but I think if I were new into ranching, I would sure want to know that all of this group of people is actually partners I could work with. I also would certainly want to know if I were new, or I know we host interns all summer, and we're giving them introduction to all of the different resources out there. Women in Ranching is a network we started, Ranching for Profit. Like, there's all these eco-farm, all these amazing agroecology kind of networks where they're not in silos, and I want everybody I talk to, whether they're in conservation or ag, to know about those, so they know that we're really all friends and we're really all in the same industry, caring about land and caring about, land that raises co-benefits, whether that's healthy food or whether that's clean air. Like, this is all the things that make us, this planet, survivable for us, right? Food, air, water, and all that. So that's, I guess, what I would answer.
I love that. I love that. And I know our time will be coming up. We're making a transition in administrations. Have you heard that at the end of this year? And we still have a lot to do. And we want to make sure all the good stuff continues. So everybody loves to tell government what to do. If you had to say, if you only do 2 more things, 3 really. I work for an ambitious governor. We all do. Let's say 1 or 2 things that you think could really make a difference, that would continue this great work and help it scale up with or without as much funding as we have had, but still with the technical resources and the intellectual framework that's been created with all of those investments in TA.
Well, I think just thinking on behalf of farmers and ranchers, if my goal is to mobilize them to be good partners for conservation and to make that network stronger, then I'd say the payments for practices is really critical, right? It really is. And payments probably for easements. Shout out to California Rangeland Trust. They did a wonderful report saying $1 investment brought $3.43 back of ecosystem services. That's a lot. They did an average of the 300,000 acres that are under their conservation easements. They get $1.4 billion back. Like we talked this morning about ROI and about the economics of all this stuff. And if we're going to try to make nature-based solutions scale, we got to figure out all the ways we can be looking for those cost-effective partners, the cost-effective strategies. That's not novel to say, but I guess anything along the lines that helps us in advance on that seems like the right investment for the state.
It's the practicalities of life. For sure. So, a personal note, you said that you got started in this journey in Wyoming. So I need to know where in Wyoming, because I come from the middle of nowhere, because I can see Wyoming from the ranch in western Nebraska. So what part of Wyoming was this? All in the Jackson Hole, Tetons area?
So I grew up in the East Coast, in farm country in New England, upstate New York. First ended up in Wyoming in Jackson Hole.
Yeah.
And then went to Saratoga, Wyoming. So I wasn't that far.
That's right.
And actually, we had a Nebraska guy. He was the rancher who was not pleased to see a East Coast girl show up to tell him how to run his ranch. So we weren't great friends at first. But then I was in Montana a couple of years, and then moved back to DC, worked at the Conservation Fund.
Okay.
Ultimately, Rob got us out here to California.
Yep. So is there a last word of advice that you want to leave us all with, based on the wisdom of your years and your academic studies?
Come out and visit us if you want, or look for the rest of your good regen ranchers and farmers around your neighborhood. And remember that what food you buy really makes a difference, because the industrial food system is not really doing any favors for humans or the planet. And it's not going to change if consumers aren't there paying the price that it costs to raise healthy, nutritious food that's good for people and good for the planet.
Thank you, Wendy. That was fun, right?
All right. Well, thank you all so much for your participation today. We're going to ask you now to prepare for a little bit of a different kind of engagement. We really want to hear from you all about opportunities that we can do better. And by we, I mean all of us. We've identified sort of 3 areas of focus for our conversations this afternoon. How can we do a better job of telling nature's story? How can we ensure that people understand and that we take advantage of creating economic opportunities as we advance our nature-based solutions agenda in California and ensure that that is done in an equitable manner? And how can we cut red tape? Where are we slowing ourselves down? Where can we speed things up and still be environmentally an environmental leader in the country and around the world? So I would be very grateful for all of you to select one of these groups. We asked everyone to identify the group that they were most interested in when you registered. You do not have to stick with that group. But I will just say that there is a chance you will go up into the room and some people might end up coming back down here because we just don't know who's going to be in what room and what size it is. So I just ask for your flexibility. And please make your way. You can go right up the stairs. You can also use an elevator if you prefer. Just please let one of our team members know that you'd like to take the elevator and we can escort you. Enjoy a cup of coffee on your way up. And we'll see you back down here at 3:10. Thank you.
Makes that might be invisible to you, but it is our responsibility as a public landowner. There has also been, as we all know, many wildfires that have occurred over the last 10 years. We calculated, along with the forest economics folks over at the Forest Service, just for sake of understanding what cost that has had, the wildfire cost on rebuilding highway infrastructure. It's $1.9 billion of infrastructure cost to rebuild, which we've done, and replace what was lost due to wildfire. So when a transportation system is interrupted, that means people can't get from A to B. It's not safe for people to get from A to B, and alternative routes and detours are cumbersome, time-consuming. So just think about that. If we could avoid the cost of $1.9 billion by doing more preventative work, that's really where our head is going now, towards avoided costs. It's an argument for nature-based solutions in advance of responsive actions to major incidents that are driven through either wildfire or drought and flooding, those types of incidents that affect people and the lands. The other thing is we are also required in our own operations to achieve net zero emissions for our own operations by 2035. So looking internally, here we've been talking about California-wide, but looking internally as the Department of Transportation, required to achieve net zero emissions from our own operations by 2035, SB 1203, if you're wondering what the requirement was. That means all the vehicles that we currently use within our operations and all the equipment, tools that we use currently account for 70% of Caltrans' operational GHG, or greenhouse gases. So we have to get to net zero by 2035. That's 9 years from now. So we are piloting very rapidly greening the fleet. Any new vehicles that are bought, if there's no operational need that they, like snowplows, there would be an operational need for those to be emergency deployed and very powerful and diesel driven. But if there's no operational need for vehicles to be internal combustion engines, also known as ICE, another form of ICE, but internal combustion engines, we have to look at non-polluting sources for vehicles. And we are in a state partner program with CARB to look at electrification of all of our equipment. So half of our 12 districts are shifting over and piloting electric mowers, chainsaws, trimmers, pole saws. We're in with CARB in a performance study. We're looking at productivity, longevity of those batteries, and if there is a fire safety risk associated with Z or zero emission electrification equipment. So it's really interesting how we roll things up for the state of California, but also I think we kind of need to bring it back home as state agency partners, and what are we doing internally also, and share that information. I'm glad to be able to share that today as well. One last just comment, because this was asked of me by Secretary Crowfoot. Does Caltrans depend on any of the grant programs? You know, you heard Chief Berlew mention some very large grant programs for forest health projects. We have not tapped into, depended on, or applied for any of those grant programs. We have looked within our own funding sources from the state highway account to fund these natural resource management objectives. And so I think that's just an important point to make, so you don't feel like there is some sort of something that's not available to you because the Department of Transportation is at the table also trying to achieve those similar goals. We have a different way, a different funding stream, that's through the state highway account. Last but not least, just one more thing. Workforce development is extremely an important topic if you're working in fire and forestry. And we have realized that those 2,000 field crews that I mentioned that work for Caltrans haven't ever had wildland fire and fuel management training, which is something that's not within our own academy. So we're developing that, and that is actually in the strategy that this summit is built around, the framework is built out around, that Caltrans will develop a Academy for Wildland Fire and Fuels Training and heavy equipment certification, so that we have just below a firefighter, just below a fire line qualified hand crew status for our own field crews. And we're really proud of that, because that opportunity is really, I think, going to open the door to a lot more people considering employment with a state agency that they might not have considered employment for as as a career. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That really amazing work that Caltrans is doing. Cindy.
Okay, I think I'll just riff a little bit off of what Lisa said, just in terms of why this work matters is the preventative nature of a lot of the programs and projects that we all work on. When I was thinking about this question and thinking about the type of work we do and others do, in my mind, this is really kind of the strategy and the defense mechanism, if you will, against climate change and against all of the really dramatic and challenging issues that we are all living right now. You can call it whatever you want, but things are a little different than they used to be. So, for me, these nature-based solution projects, because many of them check a lot of boxes in terms of benefits in one project on its own, those make them so invaluable. As state departments really looking to figure out where to put funding, what parts of the system do we really need to pay attention to in order to really build that resiliency. And, I didn't mention fire suppression, but that's one of the benefits that upland meadows also provide. But, just thinking about the whole host of challenges that we face. So in my mind, that's why it matters, what keeps me going. I have an 18-year-old daughter now, I was telling Campbell. But when I think about her generation and I think about all these young people in the world that, they're kind of entering into as new grown-ups, adults maybe. But, I think, sadly, I feel like we are sort of the last generation of plenty, looking at our store shelves being really full, having a lot of different options and opportunities, whatever that might look like, having, a lot of us go to the tap, turn the water on, we don't worry about it. I know that's not the story for everyone. But really, our young folks, future generations, they have a lot of challenges ahead of them. But the thing that I will also say is I have a lot of hope. This type of work, this community, everybody who is working on these types of projects and very dedicated to these nature-based solutions, this gives me hope. And I hope it inspires this younger generation and these folks when they see the good work you are all doing and the difference it's making. I feel like, we're handing them a gift, and I hope that I was also in the workforce, an economic development group, and I know we've got work to do there to get communication out, to get those folks kind of informed and into doing jobs like we're all doing, but I think we can do it. So I'll end there.
Very nice. Hopefully we hand them the baton and they carry on and finish the job. Annalee.
Great. Well, I know we only have about 5 minutes left for our panel. And Campbell, you said you were going to give us the sign if we start talking too much. So don't hesitate to give me the sign.
Same here.
Because I can talk forever. But I think what I really focused on this question was what keeps me going. And when I was 18 years old, I joined the fire service. And I have been a firefighter throughout my entire career. And as a firefighter, I very much was in a silo looking at wildfire. And I, throughout my 20s, my 30s, never put the connection together about that there was more to this problem than just fire suppression. And we have invested as a state a ton of money in fire suppression, and it has been amazing what that has done to help keep our communities safe, help keep our population safe, help protect our forests. But at the same time, we are now realizing, and I know all of you in this room realize, that we are not going to suppress our way out of catastrophic wildfires. And that is what keeps me going, is that when I said that and people in this room are nodding and recognize that that is a thing, that fire prevention, forest health is the long-term solution for catastrophic wildfire. And when we're talking to the public and we're talking to the legislature and when we're talking to the administration, other people are seeing that and recognizing that. That is what keeps me going. And knowing that that is not an overnight solution. The things that we are talking about are 50, 100 years out. Things that we may never see in our lifetimes, but things that are so important. And our Native American partners, right, they see this, they know this. They're the ones that have forever given us this mantra of it's not about us, it's about generations and generations and generations out from us, and the work that we are doing now, how is that going to affect them? And so for all of us in this room that are doing this work today, we are not necessarily doing it for ourselves. We are doing it to keep Mother Nature safe for years and years into the future. And that's what keeps me going, is recognizing how all of these things work together in this ecosystem of nature-based solutions that selfishly are going to help long-term also with the wildfires, and how all of these things play together, and just recognizing how it all overlaps. And so that's what keeps me going.
Very nice. feel like I should be an evangelist preacher here and say, can I get an amen? So just very quickly on my end, this work, I talked a lot about the connectivity to California's water supply, but I think one of the reasons this work really matters in my view is the economic viability of these lands and the people that are managing these lands in the Delta. They pay tremendous bills pumping water off the islands to keep that root zone clear, and they also pay a tremendous amount of money to maintain their levees. And they recognize that they're below sea level and they are fundamentally threatened, and they're looking for ways that they can, be economically viable into the future. So rice is a slightly higher value commodity. We've engaged the carbon market to actually to offset lost ag revenue, and that's starting to really show promise as carbon values go higher. So it's really throwing them a lifeline and then giving them opportunities and ways that they can hopefully keep their practices going into the future, into the next generation. The thing that really keeps me going is that been working on this for 15 plus years, and we're actually starting to kind of feel like we're getting to that tipping point where we have enough big demonstration projects that people are really taking notice that they can be more economically viable. They can address the fact that they wake up every morning and the river's 25 feet above their head, and they also then recognize the benefit of stopping that carbon emission too. So they're coming along from the kind of a holistic viewpoint of how this benefits them and benefits all of us. And it's a kind of a beautiful thing. So, all right, so we're running short on time. I want to get to our last question, and maybe we'll just do a super lightning round here. But just a few words on, excuse me, from your perspective, what does it take to keep this momentum going? What do you need? What do you feel like we collectively need to do to keep it rolling?
I'm going to be a little selfish here and say I would love to shadow a couple of people for the day, walk in their shoes. I think that would be super helpful to me personally, to not only to network, but to learn a little bit more about certain gaps that I have in my knowledge. And I think job shadowing for a day is a really low risk idea. And then I would welcome that, obviously, in return. So that's what I need. I need some job shadowing.
Excellent. We're always happy to take people out in the Delta.
Okay. Very quickly, I think just keeping this momentum going, continuing to prioritize this work. I think for those of us who are sitting in some decision maker positions, maybe we have the ability to fund work, like really just keeping this at the top of our list, strategizing on what makes sense, and partnerships. Resources was my number one answer. There's never enough of that. But, as we continue to fight for that and secure that, but partnerships and leveraging expertise and resources, that's ways in which I think we can keep this work going, and more 30 by 30 type initiatives as well. So, thanks.
Right, Emily.
I think to keep this work going, really need to look at the sustainability of it, right? And we have been so blessed to have so much grant funding over the years, but we know that grant funding won't always be there. So how do we make this work in the economy and really be able to continue these solutions for the long term? 2026 is an all-out sprint year. I think the Secretary talked about it this morning. We have a lot of opportunities ahead of us as we finish out this administration. And so we all know, and we've been told by the administration, by the Secretary, that we are all hands on deck for this year, and we are looking forward to partnering with all of you to find efficiency to make this work happen and get across the finish line.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just kind of quickly state the obvious, but money. I actually have been involved in some really interesting conversations lately, trying to bring philanthropy and private investment into this space, and really trying to help them understand how their money can be transformative and where it can be most effectively invested. So I really think that partnerships and trying to find those other funding sources as well as public funding is really, where a lot of our focus needs to be. So I just want to thank the panel for really enlightening and inspiring discussion about what the state's doing, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much. Great to hear from you all, and I know that there was a lot more that you could have gone into, so that was just the start. Well, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce my colleague and fearless leader in the governor's office, Sarah Swig. She's the Deputy Cabinet Secretary and Senior Advisor on Climate for Governor Newsom. And she is going to say a few words to help close us out. Thank you for joining us, Sarah. Welcome.
Hello. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you all for showing up and for the work that you all do day in and day out and being here. I think it's a real testament to the power of all of the people in this room and the strength of the administration that we had hundreds of people in this room today for California's first Nature-Based Solutions Summit. You know, this is really demonstrating this is not a side conversation anymore. You know, using the role of nature, partnering with nature is absolutely essential to the work that California is doing to prepare for the impacts of climate change. So thank you all for being here. As Amanda mentioned, I'm Sarah Swig, Deputy Cabinet Secretary in the Governor's Office, and I cover all things climate across the administration. And I recently moved back home to California from Washington, D.C., where I spent the last 10 years working on Capitol Hill on natural resources and climate policy. And some of my favorite work and the work that I'm most proud of was honestly working with a lot of the people in this room and the state of California, Governor Newsom's team, Secretary Crowfoot, advancing conservation proposals, including the establishment of the Chuckwalla National Monuments, the Titla National Monuments, and working on Senator Padilla's team to advance the Outdoors for All Act to codify funding for urban parks programs into law. But moving back to California, I can just say so clearly that doing that work from a desk in DC was not the same as being in California, reconnecting with the land and just the access to nature that we have here. You know, one of the best parts of coming home has been that opportunity. Being outside, connecting with nature is personal, it's family, it's professional, and it's really just about that community. And as we're all discussing here today, it's also absolutely essential to the work that I do in the governor's office and across the administration. You know, we know that nature is one of our most powerful tools to address the climate crisis and reduce carbon pollution. You know, I hear a lot about this in my work that 20 years ago, California passed AB 32, setting the first economy-wide emissions limits in the nation. We had a lot of skeptics. We didn't know how we were going to get there, but we were listening to the scientists, and in that work, we proved that you can cut pollution and grow the economy at the same time. We knew that we needed a massive shift in direction to meet those goals, and California has done that time and time again. You know, the good news is, as we face these really audacious goals that California sets, is we sort of have a roadmap that we have followed time and again for how we meet those really complex challenges and make those big transitions. I think a lot about the work that we've done on zero-emission vehicles and clean energy. You know, we've set targets, we've set up programs, we have funded those programs, we've held ourselves accountable, we've made changes, and then, you know, we make progress. And thinking about zero-emission vehicles and clean energy, you know, today California is powered by 2/3 clean energy, and we're reaching our zero-emission vehicle goals faster than anybody would have predicted recently. We just broke the milestone of 2.5 million zero-emission vehicle sales ahead of schedule. And I say that to say that over the last 7 years, the administration has really brought that same approach to nature-based solutions, moving beyond aspiration to implementation. In 2020, as you all know well, Governor Newsom issued an executive order to help scale nature-based solutions across the state. We put forward the state's first nation-based solution strategy, and with AB 1757, we've established California's first statewide targets, so that we're not just doing the good projects, but actually driving towards measurable outcomes, which I can say in joining the governor's office is something he cares about a lot. Most importantly, you know, we've backed this up with real investment, nearly $10 billion since 2020. I heard money, money, money. I mean, $10 billion is a really significant investment, and we were proud in this year's budget proposal released a couple weeks ago to propose another $2 billion from the climate bond, largely to nature-based solutions. So thank you again to the work of all of you in the room. We are seeing progress. We are on track for our 2030 goals, but we also know that this next phase of work is really about delivery at scale, coordinating among all the people in this room, state agencies, conservancies, tribes, community groups, philanthropy, and the private sector. So as Secretary Crowfoot mentioned earlier today, we see this as the first of a series of convenings, really just the kickoff of the work that will happen across the state this year. And as I heard mentioned earlier, the governor is all about accelerating implementation. How do we move faster? How do we move faster? So we have less than 365 days left of this administration. So just, encourage us all to keep working together and moving faster. And the governor was sorry that he couldn't be here in person with all of you today, but he did want to, help close out the summit with a few remarks. So I think we're going to play a video from the governor as a thank you to being here. And again, he sends his regrets that he couldn't be here in person. So I think we'll turn to the video.
As you all wrap up the first ever Nature-Based Solutions Summit, I just wanted to take a moment, add my voice to the voice of many others, and congratulating you. Congratulations on the remarkable progress you've made in this space. As many of you know intimately, we have reintroduced beneficial fire, we've greened cities and schoolyards, we've restored wetlands, and we've supported the return of tens of thousands of acres of ancestral land to California tribes. Those are just a few of the many successes in this space. California demonstrably has set some of the world's most ambitious and comprehensive targets for using nature in our climate fight. And in just 6 years, and this is important, we're well on track to meet those audacious goals. And we're doing it by bringing people into nature, not by keeping them out, making them just as much part of the solution as nature itself. By encouraging people to explore and connect with the land, we're fighting to conserve, but we're also demonstrating firsthand the impact we can have when we look at nature as a partner, not just as a resource. We're proving what's possible when we set real goals and hold ourselves accountable to meet them. Take care, everybody.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for coming, and thanks to all of you. We are right on time right now, so I just want to say you guys have watched me watch the clock today, and I killed it. So, yeah, it's not a skill of mine. I'm not going to say anything other than just a huge thank you to everyone, to folks who came from far and wide to join us to share their perspective, to our teams who, helped with getting the setup and note-taking and facilitating. We all appreciate it and are really looking forward to continuing the conversation over the course of the year. Stay tuned. We'll send more information to everyone who registered, so you will hear more even if you don't want to. And I really hope that you do, and we really appreciate your contribution today. So thank you very much. Have a good day.